to the future. Yes, an interesting situation for us all, but a necessary one, I would have thought. So we'll just have to lump it. So we've got Charlie is going to be present, but are there any apologies apart from Charlie coming online? No other certain apologies. Okay. Are there any notices? No notices. Conflict of interest declarations, are there any? There are none. Now we'll go to the minutes of the meeting held 19th of May. So that's the public minutes. I'm assuming people have had a look at those. Are there any amendments needed for that set of minutes? No? We'll have a mover for the minutes. Is that a yes from Craig and Martin? All those in favour will raise their hands, isn't it? That's how we do it today. So those minutes are approved. How do you do that, Will? What do you do there? I see. Okay, got that. Are there any matters arising from the minutes? Martin? No. No one's got any matters arising there. So we'll move on to the follow-up items. We've got two, didn't we? We had the organisational performance report, and what we're going to do there, consider incorporating the tangata whenua represented on council committees with the report. No update on that, James?
Sorry, Chair. There's nothing reported unless Pity or anything to add.
Okay. The other item was
the issue we've got. The issue we've Chair, just to run that out. The issue we've got is that the online organisational dashboard requires for each user a Power BI subscription.
That's right.
And I think we just need to work through whether it will genuinely be used before incurring what's not an insignificant sum for the ratepayer.
Sure. And
happy to do it if it's going to be used. But, yeah.
Sure. And with the advent of Māori constituencies may supersede it to some extent. Second item, LTP IT work program delivery. Jess, any comment on that?
Yeah, so we propose that we'll bring back a presentation and a full sort of update around how we'll intend to deliver that within the corporate plan to the next committee meeting.
Yep. Great, that's fine. All right, can I have a mover to receive the update report? Is that you, Will? Someone? Thanks, Martin. I'll move. If you could second, that'll be good. So all those in favour of receiving that report will raise their hand. It's all good. Then we move to agenda item. What is it? Follow up from. So the follow up. So sorry. Call for minor items. Are there any minor items that you want to raise today? Gosh, that's a first. Anyone? No, it's all good. So
yeah,
we'll go.
Sorry, I was a little slow to get to the mute button. While I'm not hardly a minor item, there was a request from Councillor Ormsby for just an update on our business continuance activities. So I'm happy to do that either at the minor items stage of thing or before we get into the substantive, whichever you prefer.
Well, let's just park that for a moment, James, and it may sort itself out in the next item anyway, or within the corporate strategic meeting follow-up. Sorry, the FARS committee report may arise there as well. So we're up to. I'm just following
Mr. Chairman. Chair.
Martin.
Yeah, just I guess some messaging. I had thought to mention this as a minor item, but in linking to what James has just shared, some messaging to the public about public transport services and mask wearing, and making sure that that's all understood by drivers in the community. Just perhaps a brief discussion or a briefing about that.
Yep, that's fine. Let's do that. So we'll treat. Can we treat that as a minor item?
Well, I don't need to necessarily make it a minor item. It just needs to be an item on the agenda. I just think you deal with it at the what best time suits you, Chair.
Sure. All right. Okay. Well, we'll include it as an additional item there. That's fine. When do you want to do that? Do you want to do it now or the decision items?
James, when do you think it works best?
Yeah, can I suggest we get the decision items out of the way and then come back to those?
Sure. Okay, that's fine. Let's do that. So we're up to agenda item 6. I'm just making sure that's correct. Yes. So agenda item 6 is the representation review arrangement. So it's a really important piece of work we need to consider. So we'll do that now. Who wants to lead that? James, you're going to lead that out.
I'm going to pass straight over to Leanne on this one. She's the author of the paper.
Yep. So we've got a late paper. I'm assuming folk have read that. A comprehensive paper there with lots of detail. Leanne, do you want to take it away?
Thanks, Chair. I was going to let you take the paper as read, given the circumstances. Nothing particularly new to add, although I had a query from Councillor Foley about the land area involved. So if it's helpful, I can provide those figures now so that then you can add that into your considerations. So the land area of the Whitehall constituency is 4,077 square kilometres. Central Hawke's Bay is 3,328 square kilometres. Hastings District, because I don't have it split, is 5,227 kilometres. And Napier City Council is 105. So when we talk about the extended new Whitehall constituency, that potentially that moves it to take area from Hastings District Council. I've got an email into our GIS to see whether they have those figures available for what the new areas would be, but I haven't heard back yet, unfortunately. So given that, I can just turn over for questions if anybody has any.
Right. I'm sure there will be questions. Does there anyone want to lead out on inquiry about this very important topic? It's Peter, you're here. Was anyone else from Māori Committee going to be known to be at this this forum? Is where do we sit with tangata whenua representation today?
No, not that I'm aware of, and I missed the Māori Senate Committee meeting last week. I know the kōrero just around the definition, and this overall comment was been made previously. It was around the boundaries, and I know there's been discussion around that, how that's going to be incorporated in the modelling. If you look at traditional boundaries, is that what? If you look at Whitehall and the makeup, it's not based on Māori boundaries.
Sure, yeah,
that makes sense.
Is that problematic, Peter? Is that what's likely to be? Are there any issues in that configuration? It's been recommended from our RPC and Māori Committee by the looks and by consultation. It came as a surprise to me, but does it generate issues in itself, having a two constituency, two geographic locations for the Māori constituencies.
Well, yeah, there's been mixed comments in regards to that, because some people originally, when we were discussing it, had a mixed view. And a decision has to be made at the end of the day, and it's just based on the I suppose your representation, who you're going to get that puts themselves forward, and what the makeup or the mix is going to be. So a little bit difficult for me to pass comment on it for the different organisations that are involved, because there was a mixed view. And what I'm saying is that it's been passed, but
tricky one.
It's not an easy thing to get through around that representation.
Paddy, can you please comment here? Can you walk through what the consultation looked like and some of the rationale for choosing two geographic locations?
Yep. Thank you, Chair. Regrettably, our tangata whenua members that are on here were not at either of the meetings, both for the Māori Committee and also for the Regional Planning Committee. Over and above what's already written in the paper, to add to that, there was hearty discussion in both forums around one or two constituencies. And part of this was really just making an initial move, knowing that at latter years that was reviewable. And so the preference was to move to two. Something that's in the paper, which was referenced within the Māori Committee and fairly well supported by the Regional Planning Committee, was to move to an awa boundary as being one that sat more traditionally with tangata whenua. And that's reflected in the paper, Chair.
So that which awa boundary was settled on?
That which is mentioned inside the paper is the Ngaruroro.
Mm-hmm.
Although in the Māori Committee, there was also mention of Tū Taikuri.
That's right. Okay, right. Do you feel that the issue of two geographic locations was strongly held? I mean, is it something that would greatly trouble tangata whenua if in fact we reverted back to two representatives from the entire rohi? What's your thinking on that?
There was much debate in both of those forums about one or two, and I think part of the whakaaro, both from the outlying areas, both Tamatea and Wairoa, was because the urban population is very much around the middle, around the central Heretaunga Ahuriri area. The preference was towards two. Okay. But to use that as a test in the initial stages and to see whether or not in latter years, once we're able to review that, whether or not we heard any learnings that might reconsider one constituency. Two is their preference at this point, Chair.
Great, thanks, Piri. We've got questions from Craig, Martin and Heniwai. Start with you, Craig.
Thank you. Got some questions about the paper in general, but to come back to, but I'll just ask of Piri really. Just the kind of the north-south, I absolutely appreciate where you've landed on the awa type kind of natural boundary. Is there a principle you've looked at there which, as in the paper, when you do that, regardless of which river it is, it's about 15 or 16,000 people in the northern side and about 15, 16,000 in the southern side. Is that a key reference point to you as you're thinking about that representation and which particular river it may be? Was that part of the thinking?
So the suggestion around using an awa boundary was because it more considers traditionally how those boundaries were set by hapu or by iwi. In amongst the discussion on, particularly in the Māori Committee, their consideration was that if we started off with two constituencies, then they could review those at a later point. And part of that discussion, and amongst a few of them, was that you can make the decision now around 2 representatives, but what it ultimately comes down to is how each of the hapu, the marae, the iwi, work in terms of the nominated people and the support and behind those when it comes to voting for those elected representatives.
Yes, sorry, Chair, but even that split, it does arrive at about 12.5 and 15,000. Yeah, that may move a little bit, and all boundaries can change in the future as people come and go from the roles or there are boundary changes. But it just, you know, in your answer to the chair, or sorry, maybe it was Peter, it's regardless of which river it is, it's kind of fallen with roughly half the population on the Māori roll on the northern one and roughly half on the southern one. Those numbers being about 12.5, 13,000 and 15,000, which is in Kui with the kind of 10% tolerance.
Can I, anyway, do you want to come in now with a question?
Yeah, kia ora, Chair. Kia ora koutou katoa. Leanne, this might be a question you can answer. In point 29.4 in our paper, it talks about the Māori representation for that scenario being outside the minus or plus 10% threshold. Could you tell me how far out that threshold Māori representation would be in that scenario?
Sorry, Henawai, you were asking how far out of the proportion it would be?
Yeah.
It's so according to the, and I meant to do this beforehand, sorry. It's based on the population being roughly 20 odd percent. And if we add another 2, it's just, I'll have to go back to my spreadsheet, and can I come back to you in momentarily?
But would you say it's quite a large, difference, or it's only small?
Being that it is, we're only dealing with small numbers in the first place, it tends to be a little bit larger. Okay. So if we were dealing with a really big number, it wouldn't be as big. So I'll go back to my spreadsheet and I'll pick out that number.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Anyway, welcome, Charlie. Nice to see you today. You're zooming in from Mohaka.
Yes, I am.
Great, thank you. Martin, you've got a question.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just lower my hand. Now, just Leanne, questions on the realignment of the boundary between Wairoa and Ngāro Roro. We've got 2 options. There's a whole pizza or smorgasbord of options in here, but within that, there are 2 proposals you've put to us, Proposal C and Proposal A, to try and bring the various options more closely within the 10% constraint. And I was just having a little bit of trouble understanding the relationship or difference between those proposals. The maps weren't doing it for me, and I'm just wondering if you could, in a moment after I finish the question, take us to the map and just explain geographically how Proposal A differs from Proposal C. I notice under Proposal C, for example, if we were to have 11 councillors, we have Wairoa would go from about 4,300 to 6,800, and Ngāro Roro would go from 18 down to 16. So there's about a 2,500 up and down on each. That's for Proposal C, whereas for Proposal it looks like Wairoa goes up about 800 and Narororo goes down about 800. So I guess the second part of my question is that leaves Wairoa and Narororo still, certainly Wairoa, quite outside the 10%. Is there any option for a more significantly expanded Wairoa boundary? Do we need to do that? Are we going to get this home at that kind of discrepancy from the 10%? And you know, Narororo is equally still quite an outlier in terms of the number of voters per elected representative. So those are my questions. Boundaries, how does it work, and can they be adjusted further?
Thanks, Martin. Yes, they could be extended further. So we actually worked on 3 options to extend it as far as necessary to get as close to the population that was used in the as close as possible to the population being within CUI of the plus or minus 10%. So the options we've got are I'm sorry, proposal C.
Yeah.
You see the map, and the boundary we've taken as far as we needed to get to close to the 45% of the average that was used in the 2019 elections. And if you notice there, that takes the boundary well down. Daryl's worked it so that it includes all of the Kaharanaki and Rangatiki parts of what was Narororo, and it takes it down. It's cut off at the top, very top of the edge of Napier City Council, and then it goes down and takes in parts of Narororo, including like Twyford and those types of places. The reason we did cut it off there was because it was considered that we'd have quite an argument with those people in that extended boundary as whether or not they would consider themselves part of that community of interest, if you like, given the distance from the Wairoa Township, which would be, and also that their normal TLA is not Wairoa. It's either Napier or Hastings when they consider which TLA they identify closest with. The other proposal A was developed just to take like what we would consider maybe the extent to which those people in that extended boundary could still reasonably identify with Wairoa as being their, community of interest. And that only extends as far as the Esk Valley. I think one of the reasons that we only put those 2 options was that if we were to extend it as far as necessary to get population anywhere close to the plus or minus 10%, it'd probably include most of Narororo, and that map did extend all the way south to bordering on the Hastings. And on the proposal C map, you'll see how there's a pink bit and a green bit that are still included in Narororo. It took those 2 bits and parts of that next light blue as well. Now, does that answer your question, Martin?
That was really helpful. Thank you. And I get the sense from that if you try and be too purist about the boundaries, we're going to end up with Wairoa basically knocking on Napier's door and a lack of sort of a sense of community connection with Ahuriri. Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Thank you.
That's the conundrum here, is trying to match that population numbers with community of interest, and but having said that, we've already established that, and it's been accepted by the Electoral Commission that Wairoa is the outlier, and the circumstances are in play. We are attempting to balance that out, because this pushes it too far. Once you take the Māori constituency voters out, you'd end up in a real pickle. So I see a couple of hands up. I saw one. Charlie, is your hand up? You've got your hand up there. Are you asking a question at this point? If people could remember to take their hand down once they've asked their question, that'd be great.
Yeah, I really want to put it in a bid for Wairoa again. When you're talking about conundrums with communities of interest, I think you also got to look at the tribal area for Wairoa. It's got nothing to do with the Ngāti at all. And the tribal area for some of the others has got nothing to do with the Ngāti. So I think, to be fair, on if I take the demographics for Ngāti Pāhauwera, we've probably got 1,000 people in Wairoa, but we've probably got 2,000 or 3,000 people in Napier and Hastings. So why would we not want to bring those voters to bear on the Wairoa case? And I think that would be the same for many of the others from Nuhaka, probably Rungamai Wahine, from Porongahau, Takapau, and that back in the 50s and 60s, people were not able to build houses out in the country because of that 5 acre or 10 acre rule. So they actually had to move to towns. So with the opportunity here for our people to actually vote for their own rohias again, but within one larger constituency, they now get to actually practice their tangata whenua right, which they've never been able to do before. Only in the Ikaroa Rāwhiti, because it's one huge electorate. That's the only time we get to exercise your tangata whenua right in the election process. So those that live down the bay near many, we have large communities in Maraenui and Flaxmere. So the only fair thing I think for us would be is that if there was one huge constituency, there's no boundaries between communities of interest, and everybody gets 2 votes. I mean, under the 2 constituency thing, you only get 1 vote. How is that fair when you know that there is not enough tangata whenua representation anyway? So I know we're looking at trying to sway everybody to have one large constituency. That way, every Māori that's in the bay, that's come from Hawke's Bay, their circumstances might be different now than they were in the 1960s or 70s. They're having to live in a city, but they can still exercise their right back in their own Haukainga area. So.
Well, thanks for that, Charlie. That's I think we'll probably get to the point of just focusing in on 3 issues and perhaps distill it that way. And I've noted them as one, the number of councillors, the Wairoa Mohaka boundaries, and then the boundaries for Māori constituencies. But Will, you've got a question, I see.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And sorry for bouncing around a bit, but I'm going back to the general constituency boundaries. So just a question for Leanne. So paragraph 47, and there's a number of points there regarding the history of this and looking at the Wairoa boundaries by the Local Government Commission. So in 2018, you've stated their reasons why they didn't, or they were happy to stay with the status quo. So without I guess, reading all those out, taking those as read, are they still relevant today as they were in 2018?
Hi, well, yes, I believe so. As far as I'm aware, nothing that would impact on those communities of interest has really changed in the last 3 years. But of course, ultimately, it'll be the local government commission that decides whether they think that still bears true. And as Neil has said, of course, that gap between the plus or minus 10% has gotten considerably bigger with the taking the Māori electoral population away. I only have to think that in the effort to provide better representation for Māori, the Commission will have to take that into consideration when they're considering these numbers. That's because it's not anything that the community has done in particular that's had an impact on the numbers. It's just the way that the legislation is. So does that answer your question, Will?
Yep, thank you.
I've got a question from Craig, and then I just wanted to move on to get a bit of a straw poll going so we can distill down to the options that we need to decide on. Craig, have you got something to say in advance of that move?
I do. Thanks, Chair, and thanks the way you. There are 3 issues there, exactly right, just particularly in around the Māori boundaries. We should note that the numbers on the roll under the traditional metrics dictate 1.6 councillors representing Māori, and the general recommendation, I think, is that we accept that that's rounded up to 2. I don't sense any, and I'm personally comfortable with that and where those boundaries lie, given that discussion with Piri before and that general 50-50 split of population by the hour. That sounds pretty fair to me, but I've got an open mind on that one. Just note with Will just raised the point there about the 2018 review. Back in November, we had a debate about Māori wards and processes and analysis leading up to it. And then we had the debate and we unanimously decided that a few months ago, and that's all good. But as a direct consequence of that, half the people who were on the general roll, if you like, or could vote on the general ward in Wairau no longer can. Everything is a consequence of that. And so those that advocated strongly for that, this is the thing you had to think about, or we all have to contemplate how to solve it, because it's a positive, but dominoes have been pushed over. And I'm very concerned that I absolutely appreciate and the concerns I feel and I've heard through others about representation of Wairau and that general area. And absolutely, but to me, it's actually that's an issue after, because whichever way the numbers are struck on these various tables here, for example, in one of them, 3 people in, say, Naroro are the same as 1 person in Wairau, roughly 17,000 versus 6,000. That's just not right nor democratic. And I appreciate what Will was saying about the land mass and the coverage by a councillor. That's very apt. But when we talk about what is the community of interest, we seem to be forgetting that about 6,000 of those who were or could vote on the general seat of Wairau are now therefore choosing to be on the Māori roll or the Māori ward of Wairau, however that's made up. So the community, that's not lost all of a sudden. It's still there, just in another ward. But to me, the community of interest is things of the land, water, farming, horticulture, you name it, and there are some strong and common interests. I'm a little bit disappointed in the proposals that we have, because we asked, and I was particularly asked, that we try and get to at least double figures for Wairau. I understand it's hard when we're trying to draw these lines on the map, but again, that's just a consequence of previous decisions we made. And I would like to suggest we contemplate potentially 3 at-large rural councillors picking up central Naroro and the larger part of Wairau, wrapping around basically a larger part of Hawke's Bay, to contemplate that, because they have a commonality of community of interest, common interest, like that. Because again, if we just look at the numbers on the tables, all voters are equal. I know we're not going to get it precise, but 10% in or out, we can live with 12%. We cannot live with 55% or 66% different. I mean, I just cannot see how a person in Napier would accept that. And we're bending over backwards to try and accommodate Wairau's concerns here, which is great. But actually, this is a consequence of earlier advocacy for changing our council. The other point, Mr. Chair, is you asked about the number of councillors. For the record, I'm quite comfortable with the 2+9 proposal generally, but I'll give you the chair the floor back to you. But I'm really interested in people's thoughts as to my discussion and any response to it.
Thanks, Craig. James, I see you put your hand up. But I just before I go to you, I just wondered whether we could, if you like, reach a reasonable, it's not a vote, but it's a reasonable level of consensus on the 9+2, so 11 councillors. That and if we work through our table at paragraph 35, we can strike out the options that relate to 9 councillors only. If there's consensus on having 11, is there a view on that? You're there, Rick. Martin, are you comfortable with 11? Craig, 11. You've said that. Will, okay. I think we okay around the table with choosing 11 as the option. No dissenters on that. So that means we strike out option 1. We strike out option 3, and we strike out option 5. Is that how that works, Leanne? So we're down to option 2, which is the status quo for General Constituent Council. So that's as it is now. And I think I'll ask the question, and it follows on from what Craig has said, that leaving things as they are is probably not an option. I think that yes, we've accommodated Wairau in terms of its community of interest, but the new equations simply go too far, and we end up with far fewer electors for the current status quo Wairau constituency as it is. Is there any feel or consensus around that we essentially eliminate option 2? Is there agreement on that? Yep. Will, you're a bit here or there on that. Well, we can come back to that, but we might have different views on it. But my feel is that we can move on from option 2. So we're left with option 4, which is essentially an expansion. Jerry, have you just arrived, or I'm just seeing you for the first time? So welcome. Have you been here?
I've been here all the time, but once again, not in your vision.
I'm pleased to see you now. James, have you got something relevant on where we've got to? So essentially, we've distilled this down to option 4 and 6, or another variation which Craig has just foreshadowed.
Well, look, I wanted to clarify Craig's suggestion and how it was a variance from proposal C, which I think was sort of in line with where he was going in terms of sort of 3 rural constituencies that are broadly balanced, expanded Wairau, it's diminished Ngātaroto and Tamatea remaining largely the same. But I also just wanted really for the record, just to remind councillors that the options that have been presented to you have been constrained by your earlier indications that you wanted to go no more than 11. And had we been prepared to entertain 13 councillors in total, you could have added an additional urban councillor in both Napier and Hastings, and made some adjustments to the Ngāti boundary and ended up with some numbers that are actually more broadly equitable across the board. Now, obviously that would have been more councillors than perhaps the public might have anticipated when you communicated your intention to create Māori constituencies. But that's really the solution to resolve the equity issue between the different constituencies. But obviously we end up with a larger number of councillors. Perhaps just a note also on that, I have heard some sentiment from our tangata whenua representatives that if the councillors at large or general constituencies were increased in number, then the relativity obviously to 2 Māori constituencies, because I understand at a total of 13 councillors, we can't have anything more than 2 Māori constituencies. Their relative proportionality decreases somewhat. So that's not something particularly favoured, I understand, by tangata whenua. So look, that may not help us enormously and take us forward, but I just wanted to make sure that we had recorded those theoretical options at least, and how the direction you've given us has narrowed the option set.
Well, thanks, James. That revisits the number, and I'm sure, I think I'll be on the same page as Will, that increasing to 13, not only adding, nearly $500,000, upsets the proportionality very significantly, and tangata whenua would not be happy with that, I'm sure. Is there any desire to go to 13 around the table? I'm not sensing that. So let's not revisit that. So we're with 11. We've got 11, and therefore we do need to balance up the Wairoa constituency. We've got option 4, which takes us some way. But my reading of option 6 is that if you like, if we have to make a compromise, option 6 gets us closest to the number, and with community of interest. Having said that, it does invite very significant discussion about what community of interests are in play and how we manage that. So are we comfortable to narrow the discussion down to options 4 and 6, unless someone's got another?
I've got a question.
Excuse me, yeah.
Rick, I'll come back
question,
to you.
Question. Just to make sure I've got Craig's proposal for a rural constituency. Is it a single rural constituency with electing 3 councillors, or is it 3 rural constituencies electing 3 councillors? If it's the latter, what is the difference between what we've currently got and what you're proposing?
Yeah. Sorry, Rick, I heard the first part. My suggestion to help solve this is one very large rural constituency.
Thank you. That's the answer.
My question could James make any comment around the ups and downs of that? Because you didn't actually touch on it in your is that possible, feasible? Is it a big ask or not? Because it's just simply not part of this mix, Chair. So James,
I'd make 3 observations to that, Craig. Firstly, it's unusual. You don't see this very often, in my estimation, around the place. Secondly, it's not been foreshadowed to come as a complete surprise to the electorate. Thirdly, it runs the risk of having a particular area which has got really good connections and a good sense of community interest. For that, I would say around the Heretaunga Plains, being able to unduly influence the number of the voters and the numbers, the election of the people that are on there. It is very similar in a way to the DHB, and it's got a flaw. The DHB's got in its electoral system, it's got a flaw, and it's never ever elected anybody to represent Wairoa, which is, I think, a failure. And if you look carefully at the last election of the DHB, which is again just to be clear, at large, no one was elected from Napier. All of the people were elected from Hastings, and that caused a great deal of distress. So I think the thing is that when you have an at-large, you run the very real risk of having all of the people elected from 3 people elected from a single area, and therefore the representative function is diminished, which I think is a problem with the suggestion. That's my personal view.
Yep. Thanks, Rick. And that's a significant part of that discussion. Martin, can I go to you? I've got Jerif and Peter, but so Martin. Sorry, you're on mute, Martin. Can you start again, Martin?
Apologies. In terms of, I was too busy lowering my hand. In terms of the options 4 and 6 split, I'm angling towards 6 for the reasons that Charlie shared, but I think we should take somewhat of a lead from Charlie and Jerif around this, because it's their 2 rohis that are most significantly affected. On a mathematical proposition, I'm attracted to option 4, but for the reasons Charlie shared, I'm probably closer to 6, that you're starting to get uncomfortably spatially close to, areas that have got no real connection in a community sense with Wairoa to get down to the minus 55% under proposal C. So yeah, I just wanted to say I'm probably on option 6, but I'd be very much interested in a lead from Charlie and Jerif.
Well, yes, that's a good comment, Martin. I think when contemplating that representation scenario and the geography involved, we must remember that we do have two Māori constituency members in play as well, who also cover that geographic scenario. So it's not as though we're leaving the one Wairoa Mohaka representative on their own. They will have allies with the Māori constituency members who will have generic representation, if you like, duties as well, I would have thought. But that's another issue. Where we're going with this, Jerif, would you like to comment then and on that?
Yeah, okay. So as the paper stands, I'm going for option 6. That makes a lot of sense. Will had a good question regarding the geographical area, and Ngaururoa is a very large area and and spans very wide and far. By going to option 6, that QE changes somewhat. The area of Wairoa definitely becomes a lot bigger. But the number is still very low. It's just a matter of between Wairoa and the Ngaururoa seat, that area in between that we're actually sort of trying to carve up. There's just nobody there. Doesn't mean that they're not home, but there's nobody there. So there's no real numbers. And I actually go with some of the sentiment of Craig is that that's why I never would be in favour of 13 councillors, because it would even further dilute the rural representation on council. And I've said it before and I'll say it again, where our work is, those who actually are going to make a change in the environment and the quality of the environment, improve the environment, are the rural dwellers. It's not the people in town so much. And Neil keeps telling us that continuously. It's our sediment that is the problem. It's not actually the rubbish that floats in urban streams and rivers. But once again, all of this discussion to me is an unintended consequence of a process that's just been too hurried. I've said it right in November. I've said it again in May, and again here now. We just don't have the time to really sit down and think this through. Leanne has done a fantastic job in actually trying to get this in a paper. To me, it's still far too rushed. If I have time, I would not actually sit down and actually make decisions on this process at all. I would actually want to come to understand there's a whole lot of questions that we still need to answer that Leanne can't answer right now. So, I have my reservations about the whole process. That's all I'm going to say about it.
Thanks, Jerif. Look, I'll get to you very soon, Will. Can I just get Peter, you to comment, and then to Will?
Yeah, no, obviously I'm supportive of the process and I want to see it get over the line, and we've got review processes in place to address any issues that come up in the future. So I want to see it go through. So like any modelling, where you pilot, you implement it and you can make changes in the future. But the point I just want to touch on is in regards to the demographics and the change. And we talked about percentages in there, and I'll give Central Hawke's Bay as an example. One of our Māori trusts have brought land down there, and that potentially changes the demographic in Central Hawke's Bay with the purchase of that farm that provides 5,000 voters within that demographic. So I suppose as we go through periods of change, obviously, and as we strategise with our whānau to say, hey, you now can vote in Central Hawke's Bay, which will happen across our region, that will change percentages in the voting and potentially add more numbers when we're looking at the formula that we're discussing, because that's going to change the demographic in Central Hawke's Bay. And I talked to Debbie about that, and she agreed, and it's part of the current process that when our Māori land trusts buy land, then obviously we're a landowner and ratepayer in those areas. So I just thought I'd mention that because we're talking about numbers. So the numbers could still change to increase above that 10% threshold. Just to make you aware, and we've had those discussions as an example of Central Hawke's Bay about the changing demographics within their community. So I just thought I'd put that point out. Ngā mihi.
Thanks, Peter. That's useful. Will, can you help us, please?
Yeah, I don't know if that's going to help. Just look, all of the paper you read, and then the majority of the discussion this morning, it's all been about numbers, population, boundaries. When we take a step back and remember what we're all here for, which is the environment, are we considering which of these outcomes gives us the best result for the environment? I'm just not sure that's been considered enough here.
Thanks, Will. It's hard to squeeze that one into an electoral boundary scenario, but James, you've got a comment?
Thank you, Chair. So look, I just wanted to remind the committee that this is only an initial proposal we're deciding today that will go out for public consultation. You will receive submissions and have the opportunity to hear those. So while I appreciate Jareth's concern about the magnitude of this decision and the complexity of it, which I agree is not inconsiderable, that there is these further steps that lie ahead. And so we have got the opportunity to hear from those communities, particularly the Wairoa community, and receive their views before a final proposal is put to the Electoral Commission.
Thanks, James. Councillor Ormsby, can I hear from you, please? I haven't heard much from you yet.
No, close by. It's good listening, actually. Look, I've landed on either option 4 or 6. And yeah, I just like to mention that, this is a position we don't want to be in, and geographical area definitely want to consider environmental impact, but essentially the Electoral Commission has set the rules, and we try and make this as equitable as possible. So, it's not a perfect scenario that we wish it would be, but if we can go out confidently with either option 4 or 6, and I'm happy with all the other recommendations. I suppose just traversing again, so we've got a bit of consensus around 1 or 2 Māori constituencies. So Neil, could we go through that issue?
Yes,
and
I certainly was hoping to get there. You're quite right. I'd identified 3 issues. I wonder whether we could just park that for a brief moment, Councillor Ormsby, and just get a little bit go forward on the other 2 issues, if you like. And I just want to be clear, and Leanne can confirm this, that just as James said, we're part of a process here, and where the council will land is that we will put up options, and our preferred option will go out to this is the council's preferred option, but there are other options for consideration in the consultation. Is that how that works, Leander? So we'll go out to put the document out that says this is the council's preferred option for the constituency. Is that how it works?
Yeah, so partially right. We don't put out a range of options. It's just council's initial proposal and then invite submissions.
Sure.
And then people submit on whether they think that's good, whether they have a better alternative in mind, and
Sure.
those sorts of things.
Okay. All right.
Presumably,
in that case,
we could put some narrative. Sorry, Neil. I was just going to suggest that presumably it could be narrative in the paper around some of these considerations that have had to be weighed, so that we can point to some of the trade-offs that people might like to comment on in their submissions. Is that viable, Leanne?
Yes, definitely.
Yes. So the option's not totally in isolation. It can be nuanced in that way. So I just wanted to now test the waters and ask if there's a reasonable consensus to consider option 6 as the preferred option. Is there a view on that around the table, or any counter views to that? Martin, did you have one? Craig, did you have a? You've floated another concept, but we are actually at some point have to settle on that option for consultation. So it is where do we sit? I'm picking that well, my view is option 6 is currently the most viable to go out and discuss with the public.
Yes, sorry, Chair, you asked me the question of consensus. I mean, Charlie essentially advocated for at large for one Māori ward for 2 councillors. So he's obviously in that camp that it's worth considering. Now, I'm not strongly advocating that. I'm trying to solve the problem of the numbers. That's all I'm trying to do. And I just worries me. You partially answered it a moment ago, James or Leanne, in that we're just going to go out and say, here's the problem, public, please help us solve it. But I'm very concerned that we're not even having a paper or consideration of the point I've asked, or you're shaking your head, James. So have I missed that? Because I was actually quite satisfied with what you were starting to say there, Leanne, that because I do not have a preferred option given the information we have, because my preferred option is not even being
okay. Thanks, Craig. That's good to get where you're coming from. But we do have an opportunity between now and council next week to, if you like, at this point, choose the option that we prefer, and then staff bring back the paper that that canvasses some of those issues. So we've actually one more round with council to table this and consider it. Does that satisfy you, Craig, as to pursuing those other options that we expressed as a staff today, a preferred option, and for a paper to come back to us at council?
It's very helpful, and thank you. None of these are my preferred options, so you can put me in, but I look forward to the paper. That's very helpful.
All right, Leanne, quickly from you, and then we need to move on.
And potentially what I could do if council wants me to is we've worked out all the numbers for that option or proposal B, which was extend the Hastings constituency as far south as it needs to be to get to something like 10,000 people. And I can put that into the council paper as well, if you like, along with the map.
Okay, will that satisfy that we actually table that scenario in that, but what we're doing now is sending a signal to staff, please come back with a worked up option, and I'm suggesting option 6 with some words around it to both choosing that option and the consultation process that goes with it. And I'm coming back to Councillor Ormsby's issue around the constituency thing too. So are we comfortable with option 6 on that basis? All right. Well, let's just it's a poll at this stage because we now move on to the recommendation. But finally, we need to come to the Māori. Do we have a single Māori constituency or 2 geographic locations? Charlie has raised some issues around that. Are there any other views on it? Anyway, have you got a view?
Yes, kia ora, Chair. I'm just reflecting back on what was recommended from the Māori Committee and the RPC of the last week or two. And they both did recommend the 2 Māori constituencies. So I think we just have to keep that in mind when we make our decision today. But I do understand what Charlie's saying also. So I suppose, that we should just, take on board what those 2 committees that we asked for the advice have given us. Kia ora.
Charlie, I'll get a comment from you and from Peter. Oh, you want one, Rick, too?
I can just make a comment that the Māori electorate or constituencies were put up to do the Māori seats in Parliament. So we weren't actually geared for this. Everybody in the Ikaroa Rāwhiti is actually in there on a tribal line, so that the whole tribe is in the one electorate area. So this really is totally new stuff. But in saying that, I still believe that everybody who is living in Hawke's Bay on the Māori roll and comes from Hawke's Bay would prefer to vote for their place of origin. And you can only do that with one large area. But I guess the anomaly is Wairoa, because there are 60% Māori there and 40% non-Māori. So the 40% get a free seat, I guess, is the anomaly. And the 60% might well miss out on, realising their aspirations to have someone from their area. But that aside, I guess still come back to the one large area. There is merit in probably having a couple of rural seats swapping over as well. If we can get one off Napier and Hastings, that would be amazing. Or maybe the Wairoa one joins Napier and we get one of the Napier lots.
Peter, can I have a comment from you, please? You've got your hand up.
Yeah, I'll just say, personally support Charlie and my personal preference, but obviously our Māori Committee, RPC's made a decision. So, obviously I support, like I always said, they've gone through the process and made a recommendation. So I support their recommendation as a member. Personally, I support, I'd like the one like going to 2. So that's just my view on that. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thanks, Peter. Look, there's no guessing where my view is. I'm strongly in favour of two members for one Māori constituency. I think it's a mistake to go to the geographic boundaries because of our the very, very, if you like, nuanced way in which we've structured Māori representation. We see we're unique in New Zealand for that. New Zealand unique amongst councils for that. We've got the RPC with Māori Committee. We've got multi-tiered ways of representation, and this is an opportunity to add another valuable tier. So I'm my view. I've expressed it often enough. Can we just go around and get some, if you like, a consensus view, because it does alter the ultimate recommendation. Is there any appetite to revisit the Māori constituency boundary issue? There's some sentiment around today's table. We could be having another quiet conversation with RPC and Māori Committee as well. I don't know. Or do we just go with what they've recommended at the moment? Can I get a steer on that? Rick? Yeah, I'll mute you. On mute, Rick.
That's right. I support the 2 constituencies. I understand Charlie's perspective, but the debate that I heard at the Māori Committee and others who've spoken to me have said that they've looked at it through the prism of how the person would do the job. And it just, to them, it seemed to have 2 representatives on one constituency who went from the bottom to the top, to the east to the west of the regional council's area, was an enormous ask and too big an ask. And so they favoured from a practical point of view and from a representation point of view having 2 constituencies. But we don't need to die in the ditch on this, because this is not the last we'll see of it. My view is just take the option, and if at the end people, after having tried it for a triennium, 3 years, people don't like it, we can simply say, well, the recommendation is we'll go and try 1 constituency, 2 representatives. We needn't lock ourselves in. So just let's start on the path somewhere and see how it goes. That's my feeling. And I do think we should take the recommendation of both the Māori Committee and the RPC seriously. So. Okay, I think we've got a reasonable consensus on that. I'm not sure who the best mover of this is. And in the absence of a clear candidate, I'll move it myself. That we proceed to consultation with option 6, with 2 Māori constituencies, as is laid out in 1.4 and 1.5 of the paper. Is there a seconder for that recommendation? I'll take the chair's recommendation. Actually, Rick, I'll take yours as a seconder. So I've moved it. Rick's seconded it. I don't want to speak anymore. Are there any speakers to the recommendation? We're comfortable with that direction? No. No. Rick, do you want to speak? I'll hold it, mate, but I've got nothing to add. I think if there's something comes up, I think it needs a response. I'll speak at that point, but at the moment, sure. It's all been said. All right. Anyone else wish to speak at this point? Remembering that you do have an opportunity at council next week as well. So we've got Martin. Was your hand up there? You want to speak there? And Craig. So I've got 2, Martin and Craig. Or was that you, Martin?
Oh, yeah, I actually put my hand up ready to vote prematurely.
Oh, okay.
But,
sorry. Yeah, okay.
I mean, I'd be very loath to do anything but follow the recommendation of both the Māori and the RPC on this.
Sure.
There's a very strong influence on me as the whole situation has from the start. I'm not quite sure I understand the concern behind 1 constituency with 2 seats. It does create a risk, in my view, that both Māori elected councillors are from Hastings, which is where the bulk of the Māori population is. It's 11,592 on the Māori roll there, 4,000 in Wairoa. So to me, I think there's actually a greater chance of some local representation being secured through the Māori roll with 2. But regardless of what my thoughts about that are, that's the recommendation of the committees, and that's where I am.
Okay, thanks, Martin. Craig, you wanted to say something?
Well, thank you. I just noted that the CEO says we do have to put forward a proposal, and Chair, you asked the question, are we comfortable with the options as you're supportive of? So I note, however we do this, I know I'm not comfortable. I'm comfortable with half of them and around the Māori issues, etc. But I'm not comfortable given options that are not considered in the paper. So no, I'm not supportive.
Okay. All right. Well, so we've got the recommendations, as you know, 1.4 and option 6, 1.4 and 1.5. All those in favour, can you raise your hand or put your little marker up? So we've got Craig. Yours is not. Do you want that recorded? So you're okay. So that's I can't count Leanne for this purpose. So you can count them up, and we've got one against. So we've 2 against. That recommendation is carried. 2 against. Who's Charlie? Yours is against. Charlie's against. So 2 against. Whatever that number is, 2 against, and the rest 4. You'll sort that one out for us, Leanne. Okay, look, I'm sorry we took some. Well, I'm not sorry at all, actually. We spent a lot of time on that, and it deserved every minute of it. So, and we've got that next opportunity. Can we now move on then to the next item, which is?
Chair, can I?
Sorry,
Chair,
James?
can I please interrupt for just a a quick moment just to get some direction for staff in terms of the preparation of the paper for next week. There has been a fair bit of analysis go into it already, and we've got some direction from the committee around a preference. I just want to clarify that there isn't any expectation for there to be further analysis done on further options, such as those that have been kicked around this meeting for further discussion at the next meeting. Are we narrowing here, or are we opening back up?
No, I don't think we're opening back up, James. Leanne has identified that there was some work done on that broader scenario, and I wonder if that could simply be inserted and commented, perhaps a brief comment, and then capture some of the commentary from this discussion as part of the paper. But the option, I think, is very clear. Unless there's any other view around the table, I think, Leanne, do you get a sense of what that dialogue looks like in the paper? Yeah, and I think traversing the community of interest issues will be important to go out to consultation on, so that people are clear that this is a significant compromise to, if you like, their previous geographic. One of the things we didn't cover off was the name of the constituency, and in my mind, I had sort of Mohaka Wairoa or some other double banger that looks like that to indicate the increased breadth of that constituency. Any other thoughts on what you want to see in the paper? No, let's move on. Thank you for that. Thanks, Leanne. It's a tremendous amount of work. I know, it's like from a paper point of view, it's just hard graft all the way through. So thank you. We're up to agenda item 7, which is the recommendations from the Mighty FARS Committee. And if we go to that paper now, perhaps we can make our way through that. And then, are you comfortable to have a bit of a break after that? It takes us to probably after 10:30. Agenda item 7. How do we want to do this? Do you want to leave it out on that, Craig?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'll take the paper as read. There's one item which is going to appear later under CNS anyway. Just the headlines there, page 11 of the officials report captures everything there. Bottom line is things are ticking over as well as they can, given the circumstances and some change in personnel and some other issues. But you'll see that great risk maturity that still unfolds. It's slowed down a little bit, but staff are very keen to speed that up. Now they've started to get a full complement of staff back. Internal assurance program, again, all underway. Internal audit, talent management, that arose from an earlier discussion that we had quite some time ago at FARS, and we're going to have a chat about that later on in this meeting. I'll just leave it there. Annual audit, annual treasury. Again, any questions, no worries, or we have some of the finance team on here. I'll take the note there to compliment the finance team in particular and all those that contribute to FARS. There has been quite a workload, and we are doing what we can to help work with them to manage it, because there has been quite an uplift in the work and the reporting framework of the council, which is part of growing to a $100 million organisation and 325 staff. This is quite natural, but it can be quite stressful. But I do note thanks to the staff, and we are doing what we can to lighten that load if we can, subject to our regulatory requirements. So unless there's any discussion, Chair, I'll just move the recommendation that...
Thanks, Craig. Thanks for that. I'll just get a comment from Will first. Will, have you got anything to raise? I've got a couple of issues to raise, but as a member of the committee, have you got a view on where things are at with the FARS committee report?
Nothing to add to what our FARS chair just said there, Chair Curtin, but yeah, just support those comments around the staff and the workload and the task ahead with the size of the organisation and what we've got ahead of us.
I'd just like to highlight for this committee, I can take you to 6.3 of the paper. It's on page 10, and the FAST committee requested that this rising out of the talent management audit conducted by Crow was the realisation that we need to develop a people and capability strategy, and we'll traverse that in the public excluded paper later. And as a result of that examination of that Crow report, the FAST committee requested a report on the interim looking at for, and it states in the paper 6.3, recruitment risks. It was intended to be recruitment and retention and capability as well. So it's a much broader notion than simply suggested by 6. We will cover that excluded. The second point I wanted to raise goes to 1.8 on the paper, the 6-monthly enterprise risk report, which we considered. That's on of this current paper, and a recommendation that that we'd made. What we've said in regard to the enterprise risk report was that there was adequate evidence of the robustness of the council's risk management policy and framework and progress to implement the maturing risk management system. I actually don't believe that we're and can put our hands up to make that assertion here, and so I want to visit as the next round of FARs, and why I say that is that at the current state of our risk, our risk reporting, didn't quite believe it is robust enough. And there are a number of things that that indicate that it's not, but that's a matter for working on the system and the reporting process to get us there. So they're my reservations, if you like, about the recommendations we've got in front of us. Craig, you've moved. Do you want a second, Will? I take that as a yes. You're on mute, but yeah, that's okay. So it's moved and second. Do you want to speak to that, Craig? No. Okay. Will, do you want to speak? No, we've got the recommendations there as tabled. Are there any other comments on it? Martin, you've got the comment.
Yeah, look, I just had a couple of questions. As someone who's not on the committee, I must admit, when I read paragraph 4.2, I wasn't sure that I was engaging with the language that I was familiar with, can I put it that way? Supports the reset of the baseline for the risk management maturity project with the new deliverable dates of the reset plan to be provided to the next meeting for endorsement. And I just sort of read that about 6 times and thought, what on earth does that mean? But I think in context, it means that there were some overly ambitious goals, and given the staffing situation, we needed to calm back a bit in terms of the scale of our ambition. Is that the?
That's correct.
You're spot on there, Martin.
All right, and then, but the other question I had was, if you could just remind me at 5, it says the internal assurance program provided an update on progress via 2 dashboards to deliver previously reported internal audit corrective actions. Can I just get a sense of what those corrective actions involved and what was done in that regard?
Can I, James or Jess? I think that was health and safety and a bunch of those no game stopper type issues, just from memory. Can you comment on that, please, Jess or James?
Yes, do you want to go? Yeah.
Yep, so there'd be a range of internal audits that have taken place over the last, say, 12 to 24 months. They included procurement, health and safety. We had the cybersecurity, and we've done some internal some IT sort of related internal audits around our information security systems. So we've just been working through, we obviously prioritise the highest or the most important recommendations first, those with the highest priorities, and then we work through those in a prioritised order. So we just have a dashboard which we report through to the FARS committee, which updates our progress against working through those recommendations.
Does that help you, Martin? Right, thanks. Look, any other comments that people want to make? Just in terms of where the comments I'd made earlier around, if you like, the robustness of our approach. This is clearly is a work in progress, and the reason for me making that comment is that we've had over that period of the reporting period, we've had very significant events occur. For example, we had the November floods. The reporting process didn't actually highlight the risks there. We've got the staffing and recruitment and retention issue that was highlighted, but not to the extent needed to. We had the TB outbreak in a relationship with Osprey. We've had Business Hawke's Bay issues. We've had, and you'll see in the later report today, the dashboards that are coming through on the community outcomes. We've got some shortfalls in our catchment management. And we've got the latest one, for example, is overseer, where we've got a major hole in our ability to manage discharges and consents. So my comments is in the context of is really a rhetorical question: is our system raising the right issues? Is it identifying those? Can we do something about it? Or alternatively, is it too big an ask to actually do that? So that's why I'm, if you like, putting a question mark against our current process and trying to refine it even more. So we ask ourselves, were these risks or these outcomes identifiable? Could we do something about them? And that's why I'm suggesting we perhaps go back and have another look and see whether we can do more, or if what we're doing within our resources is adequate. That's the only question I raised. So I put that recommendation that I put the motion that we accept the recommendations. All those in favour will raise their hands. Oh, Craig, sorry, Craig, I apologise. You had a right reply and I didn't go back to you.
No, Mr. Chair, I hear what you're saying. Remember, none of this risk stuff prevents things. It just gives us better preparation and awareness of what possibly may impact on us. And it's always evolving. And all those issues you raised, I sincerely believe if this was embedded in the culture and the cross reporting, the leadership team and back up to ourselves, maybe our reaction to them and perhaps even being able to prevent them would have been a lot higher. But I'm more than happy to sit beside you and delve into it all further, because on behalf of the ratepayers, we're trying to at least identify and hopefully eliminate risks wherever possible. And all those ones you mentioned landed right on our lap. So more than happy to work with you and the team to help embellish, to help deepen the understanding and management of risks for the organisation. So on that basis, I'm seconding it, or I'm moving it, or whatever I'm doing. I'm at your whim, Chair. Again.
Yep, that's all good. We've got there. So we've all those in favour of receiving the recommendations will raise their hands. So we'll all go there. We're 10:20. Do we box on? Does anyone need a break of some description, or are you quite happy just to roll forward? Roll forward. Okay. So we're up to agenda item 8, which is the TLA compliance program. Katrina, are you with us? No? How are we going to deal with this, James?
Yes, I am.
Oh, you're here.
Sorry,
Katrina?
just unmuting
Oh, hello.
and turning on my video. So look, I'll largely take the paper as read. A slight introduction, which is this is a paper that sets out the TLA compliance with regulatory. Only it doesn't set out any other relationships across the council, of which there are many, and simply to give confidence that the compliance section's got a robust and effective strategy in place to ensure TLA compliance with national regulations and regional rules. I do have both Jack Blunden and Rob available to ask any questions if you have any.
Any questions from folk about this? Craig, you're it.
Thank you. Just a quick one. Are TLAs treated the same in this space under any regulatory lens as anybody else applying for a consent, managing consent, or just going out their normal business, such as fresh water management, pollution, et cetera, et cetera? Everyone's equal?
Yes.
Thank you.
Rick.
Just on 20, item 20, could you just, I'm intrigued by these meetings. I don't want you to go through all of them, but I'd just like you to describe for me who it is and how these meetings on waste is described in item para 20 works. Could you please do that?
I think I'll pass that to Jack.
Yeah, so I'll speak to that one. So I'm the Regional Council's representative on the Waste Officers Forum. So we meet roughly quarterly, sometimes every 2 months as well, depending on any issues that rise up. And it's basically a forum for everyone involved in solid waste, waste minimisation, and operating waste services on behalf of the councillors to meet and share issues and exchange information and things like that. It's largely more relevant for the local authorities that are running and funding and issuing contracts for their waste management. But it's useful for someone for the regional council to be there to talk through any issues. So a lot of issues recently this year, like the pelts being diverted and generating a lot of odor, as well as influx of treated timber and asbestos waste. It's really important for us to be represented in that forum to be able to give our view and what we would like to see, and almost influence them as much as we can towards achieving a better outcome. That's the
Thank you for that. Is there a high level of cooperation and collaboration between the TLAs on this matter? I mean, do we getting them to work more closely together, or do we still having each run its own cutter, so to speak, and just talk on the margins?
So I think they're working much closer together now. So as the regulator, we're not involved that much in the waste practices themselves, but the TLAs do discuss and work together on joint processes, especially Napier City and Hastings District, given that they share one landfill. They set goals and they work together on their bylaws and waste management projects, and they're quite a few of their initiatives are joint initiatives because they have the same endpoint of trying to divert away from landfill waste. And then the Central Hawke's Bay and Wairau District Council get to, I guess, learn from those initiatives as well, which is really good. So it's that sharing of knowledge, and there's a really good relationship there between all the officers.
Anyone else with a question there? If not, can I just go to paragraph 12, Katrina, in your paper? The TLA compliance programs incorporates actions from the strategic plan, including, but some functions are under other sections of council, including catchment management, asset management, consent planning, policy, and projects. Can you tell me how they are joined up? How do you what communications are had or meetings are had to make sure we join all of that stuff up with the compliance program?
So largely we've got the policy implementation teams both in integrated catchment and regulatory. So you've got Brendan's team and you've got Louise's team. So those teams are working across the organisation, ensuring that all of the appropriate teams are meeting and talking, and that's working really well.
Thank you. I have a second question, if you don't mind. It takes you to paragraph 33, the next steps, and I just referenced there our increasing collaborative initiatives with the TLAs. And I note, for example, we've got governance involvement for drinking water, obviously. We've got that with coastal hazards. What are your thoughts and plans for joining up and collaboration with TAs at a governance level, in addition to obviously this is at a sort of compliance officer level? Have you got a view on where we should be heading for specific governance involvement in those other across the board?
Look, as we discussed the other day, Neil, ultimately, in terms of Three Waters, there is considerable involvement across all of governance at the moment in that space. The officers themselves are working really closely with the TLAs on Three Waters, and I think it's working really well. The question I would ask is, what are we trying to achieve with more governance? What's the problem that we're trying to solve? There is a pressing need at the moment in terms of, in particular, Napier's proposed district plan and their spatial plan, their proposed growth and where that's going in terms of hazards, and particularly for wastewater and water takes. Particularly at a governance level, of course, you are more than entitled and would have some good input, no doubt, in that direction. I'm not proposing any additional governance groups or the like, but happy to be guided.
Any other questions on the paper?
Chair, could I just provide a supplementary response to that? So the Drinking Water Joint Committee has recently undertaken some discussion amongst its members as to its future role, particularly given that the recommendations of the Havelock North Drinking Water Inquiry have been fulfilled. And that discussion remains live around the potential expansion of the purview of that committee across into Three Waters infrastructure more generally. A decision hasn't been taken on that matter at this point, given that the government's got a range of proposals around Three Waters, which are the current focus of discussions. But there was a paper that came to council in the last few weeks, which we withdrew on that matter, which was around the future of that Drinking Water Committee, precisely because there is a desire to keep options open and keep a discussion around a greater level of joint governance oversight across the Three Waters assets of the region as a whole.
Thanks, James. Councillor Ormsby, you've got a question.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thanks, Katrina. In paragraph 34, you talk about HBRC, Napier City Council collaborating in terms of enforcement. Could you just break down for us the strength of enforcement if we did it separately versus alone when it came to industrial spills in, say, the Ahuriri estuary?
Yeah, I can. So the recent, I can talk you through the recent example of the galvanizers and why we've decided to do what we're doing and why we're working with Napier the way we are. So Napier have a trade waste bylaw under which they prosecute. Bylaws can only receive enforcement by prosecution, not by enforcement. And the penalties are quite low. I think it's a maximum of 20,000. So in terms of punitive measures, it's quite light. Whereas under the RMA, we are up to 200,000, I think, from memory, in terms of charges that, or 2 years imprisonment. So what we've done with Napier City, and we could by all means take two separate prosecutions. The risk is that in this one, that Napier City would take their prosecution under the bylaw, and that would make the case dealt with, and by the time the regional council took theirs into the Environment Court, it could be argued that it's something along the lines of double jeopardy, and it would be dismissed. Or the other way around, perhaps. There is great strength in working together, particularly from a technical aspect in Jack's team. They've got huge technical expertise that can help the TLAs achieve compliance with the industrial activities that the TLAs ultimately are trying to enforce. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that was great. Thank you for the explanation. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Peter, you've got a question.
Yeah, and my question was similar to Hinawai, and I suppose the example is around Ahuriri and the pollution and not so much around the TLA and I suppose just responsibility of maybe City Council to obviously step up to the mark and look at obviously there's been a number of issues with Ahuriri in that lagoon area, so how it's just getting confidence in that the process is going to work, and then we see better water quality because using that as an example. And I suppose Michelle McElroy raised the point up in Whitehall about the issues with discharge there. Yeah, I suppose from a Māori perspective, we have to have the confidence in the process because, it does seem limited in capacity to deal with those situations. So, I mean, we're looking for improvement. I think within the Ahuriri and the Wairau area, and then have confidence in the other partners within that collective that they're going to step up. So, I'm not saying that in regards to Hawke's Bay Region Council, but I'm saying for those councils, they need to step up a little bit more.
Yeah, so look, in response to that, and that goes back to Councillor Curtin's question about what's the role for governance here. Now, ultimately, the majority of councils, I won't say all, have put incredible investment into their LTPs in terms of infrastructure investment, and that includes Napier. They have, and I'll bring Jack in to clarify where that's at, but they do have an issue with their trade waste infrastructure at the moment. I understand that's still blocked, but they've also got, putting aside their ability to use the trade waste, they've also got industry who are discharging to the stormwater network who shouldn't be, and so there's a compliance role there for Napier, and they are taking more action, actively going out and inspecting industry and their trade waste discharges. They are working actively with our compliance teams, looking at industry, and we are picking up more and more illegal discharges into drains and stormwater networks than previously. Jack, I just don't know if you've got anything to add there.
I think we could talk about the Napier City consents. They're not just enforcement focused, so it's not just wait until a discharge happens and then deal with it. A lot of it is preventative. So the resource consent held by Napier City for the Thames Tyne Pandora industrial area, all of the high risk sites in there are required to be identified and managed. So the sites where you're most likely to get spills or have had spills in the past or have hazardous substances that will have a very negative impact on that estuary, those all have to be managed, and they have to have management plans and regular inspections and precautions in place to make sure that if a spill does happen on site, that it's able to be contained and minimize the impact. So it's not, and then enforcement flowing on from that is our last resort, basically. And that's first of all to punish the person undertaking the discharge, as well as to deter others from poorly managing their site, kind of thing.
Thanks, Jack. Peter, did you have your hand up again, or was that? No.
No, I'm going to take it down.
Okay. James. You with us, James?
Thank you, Chair. So the enforcement of trade waste bylaws has been a national issue in terms of the performance of territorial authorities. It has been well documented as being something that has not been done well and has not been a priority across the country. And look, within our own region, historically, there has been a lack of enforcement of trade waste bylaws. I'm pleased to say, however, though, that we have seen with our territorial partners in the region a real shift in recent years, particularly Napier City Council that created an environmental team that has focused on this issue as their sort of number one priority. And we have had historically and still retain the ability to take prosecutions of territorial authorities for non-enforcement of their trade waste bylaws. And enforcement action in relation to other councils in the region is something which has been continued to be contemplated in recent times. We did submit on the Wairoa District Plan's long-term plan in relation to resourcing enforcement, and I am pleased to say that I believe that Wairoa District Council now does have a trade waste officer dealing with their trade waste issues, given that they had a serious sewage spill just last year as a consequence of non-enforcement of their trade waste bylaw. Similarly, in Central Hawke's Bay, they have a current consultation going on around their trade waste, and that has been the result of council proposing to really step up its performance in this area and put some greater obligations on the trade waste sector. Hastings District Council, there is a live conversation with them at the moment about how we can collaborate better around trade waste discharges, following some discharges from the big industrial users into urban waterways just in the last few years. So look, it is an area where our ongoing statutory advocacy, our collaboration with our territorial partners is seeing a shift, and we are seeing an increase in performance, but we retain, I guess, the compliance stick of taking enforcement action, and we certainly will do so if we don't continue to see progress by our territorial partners.
All right, well, look, thank you. I don't see any other questions arising. Councillor Ormsby, were you going to move that recommendation? Yes, oh, I thought so. Yes, indeed. Thank you. Have I got a seconder for the recommendation to receive a report? Seconder will be Api. Are you happy to second that? Thank you. Any comment, further comment? No. Oh, yes, Rick, you've got a comment?
Api can't second.
Yes, I just want to thank the writers of this report. This report to me shows huge improvements on all sorts of levels. I thought the report was really well written. It was clear. I got it instantly as I went through it. The other thing I thought in reflecting after the report was what a change there has been on the monitoring and compliance activity within the regional council in the last sort of 8 years that I've known something about it. Improvements in capability. I think it's a much more professional. I thought the report showed a sophistication in dealing with these things. I was really pleased with the collaboration. I thought it was a real step change. The only thing I could think of, and as a minor matter, it's not as a criticism, as I went through it, I thought this is all working really well against the regional council's policy on compliance, monitoring and enforcement. The only thing that I thought the paper could have added into it was the council's policy, one that we worked on over quite a long period of time, and it was well thought through because it fitted exactly with that. So it would have been just nice to have had, well, the council's policy is this is how we're doing it. So it reflects not just an individualistic behaviour or a behaviour of the team, but it is in fact following council's own policy here. I thought it's very good, very pleasing. So thank you.
All right. Well, look, Councillor Ormsby, were you wanting to further comment? No, that's okay. Look, Api, Api, you're on mute, mate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just with regards to Craig's corridor, it'd be great to get some clarity around that, whether or not my role on this board comes with voting rights as well. I know that it doesn't on the council table, so some clarity there would be welcome. With a follow-up with regards to this paper, I agree with Chair Barker that this is an expression of a growing collaboration between our entities, and it has worked fabulously to be able to leverage each other's own strengths in situations where we're trying to push for behavioural change within our community and particularly within our industry. So these are all fantastic indicators. The one question I have around as a follow-up to staff is, could you provide me either with an internal memo or some mechanism that's easiest for our staff, but I'd like an understanding of what testing is done, because this is very much at the end of, this is the ambulance at the end of the cliff. An event has happened, there's a compliance, there's legal action, et cetera, could some of the staff follow up and provide me with what actions or what monitoring or what interaction with industry and mana whenua in those areas is a part of the ongoing and regular monitoring of those sites going forward?
Thank you, Api. Just for clarification, you're a fully participating member of the committee. You can move and second and vote. So that just clarifies that. I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour will say aye. I will raise their hand. Thank you. Look, are people interested to take a break at this point? So we're at 11:15. I'm interested in a cup of tea.
That sounds like you are, Mr. Chair.
Yes, I am very much interested in that. So shall we reconvene in 10 minutes' time at 5 to 11?
15.
15
Yes,
minutes?
15.
You're 15. All right, 11 o'clock, where we'll start again, and we'll start at agenda item, 9, through there, those reporting requirements. So there we go. agenda items 11, we've got a series of them here. 11, the interim result carry forwards, and then the non-financials, etc. So do you want to make a start on that, Jess?
Yeah, so we don't have Tim Chaplin is off sick today, so we don't have Tim with us, but we do have Ross with us, who's helped pull together the interim financials. And it's just worth noting that these are interim results and we haven't had these audited yet. So financial results for the year ended 30 June are likely to move and change as the financials are audited through the year-end process. But these give us a bit of an idea of what the year-end position looks like. And I suppose worth noting is there is a, quite an exceptional transaction or adjustment in the financials. Worth talking about is the adjustment that we've made for the revaluation for the ACC adjustment. And this is something that the finance team has been talking about for a couple of months, and it's something that we have made an adjustment for, and we have talked to the auditors about it, but we have made it ourselves. It's not something that the auditors have instructed or asked us to make. So it is yet to be audited and finalised. So the reason that the adjustment has been made, it's a balance sheet revaluation adjustment, and it's been made because so the balance sheet value of the land, the leasehold land, the value of the leasehold land has increased substantially over the years since the 2013 agreement has been made. And the value of the land has increased as a result of the periodic revaluations that we make. I suppose the associated value of the liability that we owe ACC hasn't been adjusted and kept up at the same pace as at the same rate as the valuation of the land. The valuation of the land has been adjusted periodically because we do make revaluations. I think we make those every 2 or 3 years of our assets, but we haven't had to make revaluations of the liability that we owe ACC. So the offsetting liability that we owe ACC hasn't kept pace at the same level of the valuation of the increase of the land at the same rate. So we've decided that we need to make that adjustment to offset the increasing valuation of the land, if that makes sense.
Just to comment on that, Jess, does that align with the revaluation for rental purposes? How does that coincide? Obviously, these are 21-year renewable leases. They are revalued for rental purposes, but are you talking about the valuation, the revaluation roll updates for council for rating purposes? What can you link the two, please?
So it would be the liability or the what we would owe ACC under the contract if the properties were sold. So if the tenants purchase the properties based on the valuation of the property under the contract that was signed in 2013 at the current valuation, that's what we're revaluing the liability at.
So just to clarify, I'm not sure, in the contract itself with ACC, is the valuation made on the valuation for rating purposes or the valuation for rental purposes, setting the rent? Can you recall that? It may be a detail that, because one will be set is done every 20, well, is done 1 year in advance of the 21-year tenure. And the other is done obviously 2 or 3 year on the valuation cycle.
I can perhaps jump in here if it helps. Under the original contract, sort of based the payment from ACC was based on a value or a minimum value based on the forward rental returns for each property with a discount rate at that point in time. Under the contract, we pay ACC the minimum amount of rentals that was actually as recorded in the contract, but we then also pay ACC 2/3 of any increase above that and 2/3 of any capital gain on the sale of the property. So the adjustment reflects that, yes, I did some rough back of a cigarette packet numbers for you. For example, that the total land value is being revalued up to about $42 million as at 30th of June. The historical provision is still sitting at about 10 million in terms of the minimum payment under that contract. So say there's a gap of 32 million. That gap, 2/3 of that would go to ACC if it was all sold as at today. And only 1/3 would go to the council. And that's why we've made the provision to say, well, we will only actually get sort of 1/3 of that in cash if we're sold. So we're just sort of balancing things up so it reflects the right value.
Okay, Jess, carry on.
So it is just a book revaluation. It's not a payment to be made, and it does offset asset revaluations that we've recognised in previous years as we've adjusted asset revaluations since 2013. So looking at results outside of that adjustment, most of the day-to-day actual results are favourable in terms of day-to-day operations. I won't go through the results detail by detail, but there's lots of ups and downs. If you look at the investment income, managed funds have exceeded expectations. They've performed better than expected. But then that's sort of slightly offset, or that is offset when you look at HBRIC. The valuation of HBRIC is valued by, significantly impacted by the share price of Napier Port as at the 30th of June in each financial year, which was slightly down 30th of June 2021 compared to the previous year. And so forth through the report, and I think the ups and downs are explained quite well through the report. So happy to go through and answer questions if there are any specific questions on the specifics.
Councillor Foss.
Thanks, Chair. Just on the ACC, so basically it's a clarification, a more correct presentation of the accounts since 2013. That 21 mil, there would have been incremental changes on the way through, but we're just taking the big adjustment now. But there's a further question there. Where does the other 1/3 appear? Is that just a revaluation of our assets? And has there been another change? Because prior to this, any kind of windfall beyond ACC sale price, I think was going into operational funding where it should have been into capital funding. So has there been any change there or further consideration of that? And then once this is locked and loaded, we should just see some more small changes go through as ACC or we sell properties or however it works out. This should be the end of those these lumpy changes.
So we revalue our assets periodically. So we've been revaluing our, we would have been recognising the revaluation of our assets. I think they're 2 yearly, Ross. I'm not sure if you can recollect how regularly we revalue our
leasehold portfolios, because it's an investment property, is actually revalued every year. We're out of interest. This one.
So
you haven't been doing the liability.
Yeah,
Correct.
so we've been recognising the upside on those annually, and obviously we're recognising, I suppose, the downside since 2013, all on one go at the moment. So in terms of the financial statements, of the notes of the financial statements, audit haven't required us to, I suppose, to revalue the liability of that agreement since 2013, and they haven't asked us to. This is something that we've looked at, and we've noted that there probably is actually quite a significant shift in the liability owing to ACC, and we think that we probably should adjust for it.
Yeah, totally agree. But are you making any historic adjustments for operational and capital?
No, we're not. So we've incrementally adjusted for the upside in previous years.
Oh, sorry, cut out there. I didn't hear that. Sorry.
No, we're not making any adjustment. We're making the adjustment for this year would be the historical adjustment.
And the capital side versus operational side?
So that will be adjusted. Ross, can you?
Well, the capital side is the contra to the amount that we're reflecting as the adjustment. Obviously, we're effectively increasing the liabilities on the balance sheet, which offsets the. So on one side, we've got the 42 million portfolio, but on the other side, we'll now have a $30 million liability provision.
Yeah, but when you sell one, it now goes into capital replenishment plus the liability. What you were doing in the past was selling one, and that excess you were putting into operational, right?
We
so
have
that's a change.
We've adjusted that through the Treasury policy, so it's now documented.
That's
correctly, yeah.
Because that's quite significant. Okay, thanks, Chair.
Yeah, James.
Look, I just wanted to make a general comment about the year-end result. Look, obviously, sitting here at Groundhog Day and lockdown takes us back away to when the annual plan budget was prepared. And of course, we went through a long-term plan variation, as you'll all recall. There were a heck of a lot of unknowns, and it was a really dynamic year in terms of our operating activity, our income, and all sorts of uncertainties. So, I just was enormously pleased when I saw the result. We ended up really as close to where we did at our operating just under budget and expenditure. Income well over budget as well. So an overall favourable result for council in a really difficult year. And that's testament to the hard work of our finance team and also to budget managers across the organisation. Obviously, there are some carry forwards that we're seeking because we've had some impacts on work programs, which in general terms, and while there's some exceptions to this, in general terms, COVID did disrupt some of the major projects and continues to do so. But none of those are particularly out of the ordinary carry forwards that we've sought. So look, a pleasing result from my perspective, and just want to acknowledge all the hard work by people that have ensured that it stays that way.
Yeah, no, very valid, James. March of last year, the sky was falling in, and we were contemplating doom, but this result's absolutely extraordinary. Apart from our port director delivering us a bit of a loss there, so he'll have to explain himself on that point. Any other comments needed here? Craig, no, etc. Martin, no, all good. So we've got, can I have perhaps, Craig, can you move the recommendations that we approve the carry forwards, or is there any other discussion on the carry forwards before we do that? There are a whole range of them there. We have this as an annual go. Some of them I think can be explained by COVID and other eventualities, but as a matter of process, we this is where we do end up. We do carry these forward. Sometimes we need to challenge some of those, and but I'm not seeing where we would do that today. Martin, you've got your hand up.
Just a wee question. The operating, this is paragraph 42. The recommendation is for a carry forward of 254,000. But the figure says 233,000 at 42. Is it meant to be 254 we're carrying forward there? In the table above it, it says 233.
I'm just having a look. 233.
So that is an error. Because
yeah,
I calculated between paragraph 41, because 41 does refer to the total sort. In fact, 41.1 refers to the total sort as 354,932. And if you add 121 and 254, it doesn't come to that, comes to more. So I think the correct number is 233, because that takes you to the 250. the 233 plus the 121 equals the 354. So yeah, I picked that up too when I was reading it last night, that the numbers didn't match. So we'll, I think, go for 233,007. Ross, have you got
that's correct?
A contrary view to that?
And what's happened there is the wrong numbers been, because referred to on 42.1 that the total underspend was 254, but it's 233 that's been requested to carry forward. So there's an error and wrong numbers got transposed into the paragraph there. Apologies.
All right, we can just make that change for the paper going to council. It's okay. Any other issues, Martin? All good. No one else?
One other question. Sorry. At paragraph 60, it says corporate services seek to carry forward the 1.9 million in debt funded expenditure. The project to refurbish the Station Street office and convert the Raffles Street project to a science lab and refurbish the Dalton Street offices. Which project was that?
Which paragraph are we?
Paragraph 60. I do recall a discussion about another site, but I don't recall this project.
So originally we'd provisioned $3 million in the last long-term plan for a new site, knowing full well that $3 million wasn't going to cover the full amount. It was a bit of a placeholder. When we started doing the initial budgeting, we're looking well in excess of that for our needs to build on a new site. So the request in the long-term plan amendment post-COVID was that we would repurpose some of the $3 million, and so we've proposed 2 of the 3 to refurbish our existing 2 buildings that we own, and also fit out the one that we hire over in Station Street. So this has enabled us to take a much lower cost option to optimise within our existing footprint.
Thank you, James.
Great. Craig, you happy to move the recommendation?
Yes, or CEO, potentially HBRIC, doing a good deal for ratepayers to provide a building for you. But yes, I'm happy to move.
A second to there. I'll second that. You wish to speak, Craig?
No.
Yeah. Just re-echoing James's comment, an extraordinary result in the circumstances. So I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour will raise their hand. And it looks like we have that, so that's carried. We'll move forward to agenda item 10, which is the non-financial results. Who's going to take us through that?
Yeah, can I suggest that we do take these as read and answer questions that council has? There shouldn't be any surprises here, particularly as they've been reported on in the quarterly reporting through the year, and there is some replication of to some extent of the latest quarterly report, which was the last quarter of the financial year.
Sure.
It's just one comment I would make is that we have targets here that were set in the last long-term plan. So going back, actually, the time that council decided on them and took them into consultation, we're talking 3.5 years ago. In the case of some of our programs, such as the erosion control scheme, it was a bit of a wet finger in the air in terms of a guesstimate of what sort of impact we could deliver. And I think with the benefit of hindsight, we would have had those performance targets ramping up over consecutive years, reflecting the startup period and the time it takes to get momentum. Instead, we flatlined those targets at the same level year on year, and created a bit of a rod for our own back. But certainly in those areas, we are starting to see significant improvement. The one other area, obviously, where we've continued to struggle generally is in the transport area. And we've had sort of unfavourable trends, both with respect to road safety and patronage in public transport, which are issues that are well known to council, that we are seeking to address both through a Section 17A review of our road safety program and also the initiatives in the long-term plan to attempt to improve patronage of public transport. So That's probably all I need to say on that.
Is there scope to amend those targets in that, or have we sort of adopted them into the long-term plan, so therefore they're so rather sacrosanct? What's our capacity to modify those so we're in the ballpark achievement-wise, or are they realistic goals?
Perhaps I'll pass to Desiree to make some comment on that.
Good morning, councillors.
You're on mute, Desi.
Morning. So we have reset the targets and the measures in the 2021 long-term plan. Many of the 60 measures are the same, but there are some different ones. So, for example, the target for area of land planted through the erosion control scheme has dropped from the 2,000 to, I think, 900 hectares per year, and that's with the benefit of the past 3 years' experience. So we know that with the budget that we have fully spent, we can achieve around 900 hectares. So that target has been changed and adopted by you through the current long-term plan.
Thank you. Any other comments on that? We've got Will and Craig and Martin. So we'll start off with Will. Can you help us there?
Oh, thanks, Chair. Just a query. So I raised this before, but just around the FEMP, and there it's stated the I guess the level we're at, and we've dropped from last year simply because there's been a renewal date been and gone, and so the question is around them all being due on the same date. So we have a certain number of FEMP providers that quite often can be twiddling their thumbs for a significant period of time, and then all of a sudden they get landed on their desk, hundreds of FEMPs needing to be done within a month or however early that farmers sign up for. So I guess with obviously the overseer news has put very much a dent in the plan change 6, but going forward with reviews around our plans, if we can somehow stagger these FEMPs just to make it more feasible for actually achieving much better targets in this. And the only other query around that was in the performance target, we've got Tukitook 100%, and then we've got Tank and Mohaka as other catchment areas to be, I guess, TBC. So why are we not just 100% by a certain date across Hawke's Bay?
So through you, Chair, that relates obviously to what sits in our operative regional resource management plan. The dates for Tukitook are not staggered and are set for that catchment, obviously, as per the Tukitook plan change. The team does put considerable effort into advertising well in advance of that date that the due date is coming up. Don't leave it till the last minute, because you'll get caught with a limited number of FEMP providers and miss the deadline. To date, we've taken a softly approach with the community, and we haven't taken enforcement action in relation to the receipt of revised farm environment plans. In the future, I think that will change, particularly as we roll out region-wide and the expectation becomes stronger. And so there will be a little bit of there'll be a disincentive to miss the deadline, and hopefully that will see people come through in an orderly fashion. Having said that, still means that there's a bow wave in relation to a 3-year review cycle. The government's presently consulting on national regulations to roll out farm environment plans as a mandatory requirement for all farms across the country. And that will see the opportunity for across the region us doing hopefully a rolling schedule, whether it be different land classes, because they are looking at different land uses coming in at different timetables. So dairy coming in ahead of sheep and beef, for example. But if we can line all that up, which I think is an excellent suggestion, we'll also have to grow the farm environment plan provider community as well, but with a bigger provider community and more comprehensive requirements across the region. Hopefully we'll be in a position where independent providers are working full time, and our staff are in a rolling program of receipt of those farm environment plans. I do believe the government's consulting on a 5-yearly cycle, I think, for renewal, as opposed to 3-yearly, which might also just make that a little bit more practical than what we've got in Tuki.
Thanks, James. Martin, you had a question.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Look, I've got some more detailed questions on some of the specifics of the non-financial results, but before I get to those, I just wanted to understand the transition here, because we've got a new strategic plan, or a refreshed one as it's expressed in the document, that's got different outcomes, and we've now got a long-term plan 21 to 31, which has got different performance measures. And my understanding that all 3 documents that we've got here, which is the outcome statement, the level of service reporting, and then the organisational report further down the agenda, are all vis-a-vis the old strategic plan and the 2018 long-term plan, and that this is sort of like the end of an era kind of thing in that regard. Is that what's happening here?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, that's right. This is the 3rd and final year of the 2018 long-term plan. So we took the stance that we would use the strategic plan that was adopted in 2017 in the lead up to the 2018 long-term plan as the strategic plan for the 3rd and final year. And then next quarter, we will start using the new strategic plan.
Great. Well, that explains that mystery to me. Thank you.
Yep.
Am I able to ask just some questions about a couple of specific aspects of the reporting?
If you like.
Okay. Well, I guess it's related to a question that Councillor Foley raised. If I look at page 42 of the agenda, it's a smart, sustainable land use, and it says that of expected properties, 27% have submitted a revised FEMP, and that's marked as on track. Is 27% on track?
Sorry, I'm just getting.
So in the quarterly report, I don't think that has been expressed in the same way from memory. I haven't got both of them right in front of me simultaneously, but I thought we had marked that as now off track in the quarterly report. Have I got that right?
Yeah, I think that's right. And the level of service measures we've said, sorry, just trying to bring it up. I think we've probably stretched it a little bit and said that it's on track because the existing FEMPs we've taken to be still current, and the fact that they haven't met the due date, we're assuming that the existing FEMPs are still current. But
Katrina might help us out here, but I guess also it's the fact that of the 74%, we've got a good number there who have indicated that they have got in the queue with a provider.
Correct.
So look, it's a debatable point as to whether that's on track or not.
Excuse me. Yeah, absolutely. So we've had lots of conversations and contacted everyone that is due to review theirs and checked whether they are currently with and waiting for a provider. And I understood that last count we were, I think, 6 properties that hadn't engaged.
That's good. Thank you. Look, another question is around 2030 species. This is on page 43. Key species and habitat sites are prioritised and under active restoration, and we've got 700. We've got our head around about 13 of them. Do we need to adjust our I guess, our outcome target here in our strategic plan. I mean, if we're only 13 on 700, are we setting ourselves up to fail if we've got a similar measure? I'm assuming we've got a similar measure in our updated strategic plan.
Yes, that's
Just
correct.
get some comment from Ian on that.
Morena koutou, councillors. Yeah, look, it is a really good question, councillor, because we also need to put in context that the 700 sites that we've identified are only the top 30% of the region's ecosystem priority sites. It's a proportion of a smaller proportion of a much bigger total. But there has been some discussion about some more realistic targets that might reflect our ability to kind of get across all of those. And the other point is that our investment in this space is significantly scaled up in the current long-term plan, and we've been very successful in leveraging quite considerable sums of government funding into the space, which will quite significantly accelerate the activity to protect those sites.
Okay. Well, maybe it's just something we need to think about. The next question I had was on the level of service statement, page 55. It's to do with the allocation targets. And we've got, for Tuki allocation, we've got a total allocation of 412 litres per second groundwater stream depleting on a limit of 91. Does that mean we're sort of 5 times over allocated in zone 1, or am I reading the table wrong?
Sorry, what page are we talking?
Page 55.
55.
I believe
Bottom table.
Paper, sorry, I can't find it, but anyway, I believe on paper we are over allocated, and we'll be addressing that through replacement consents.
Right. Okay. And then finally, I have to ask, because I've frequently, currently said as I look out the window now, been treated to the sight of rabbits on my front lawn here on Mataruaho. And so I had to ask, as to page 58, what a rabbit inquiry was and whether I should make one. We've had 173 rabbit inquiries. What is the setup with rabbits in urban areas? Do we control them? Just a bit of comment about that, please.
Councillor, I can talk to that. So the process we follow is that we provide for landowners a free service whereby they make an inquiry, they've got a rabbit problem, they contact us, we send an experienced contractor out on site to advise them on the methods of control that they could employ at that site. So the inquiry is simply the transaction between us and somebody with a problem.
I shall make such. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. I'll go in this order. Craig, you've got a question, then Peter.
Thanks. I've got 3 questions. Page 41, the last item, we're on track for by 2050, we'll be improving the trend and life supporting capacity of our degraded rivers and streams. So if we're on track, where are we now? And how does that reconcile with the state of the environment reports in around the Karamu catchment, of which we've had 2, dating back 10 years, which had very, very poor quality? That's question 1.
Ian.
You're on mute, I think, Ian.
You're on mute.
Yep, the oft-said thing in our community today, you're on mute. Sorry, I'm just trying to get to that page. Sorry. What
41.
Page? 41.
Down the bottom, by 2050, basically our streams, all waterways will be trending in a much better way. But if you're trending, it assumes you know where you are now. So that's one question. Second question, reconcile that with the 2 quite negative state of the environment reports insofar as the Karamu and actually Ahuriri are concerned.
The first question, do we know where we are in terms of state of the environment? Well, the answer is yes, and so that's reflected in our reports. And I don't have the specific detail of the Karama in front of me to make comment. So the measure is suggesting we continue to monitor the MCI to provide a look at how those catchments are performing ecologically. Well, we are doing that. That continues. Plan changes are commencing, so we're in the middle of the tank, and on-ground activities that will contribute to ecosystem health outcomes are obviously continuing as well. Our degraded rivers and streams should support more aquatic life if activities like these continue. Look, it's a qualitative assessment that if we continue the activities that we have, and we fully implement the policies that are proposed in these catchments by 2050, we would see the improvements that our community is anticipating. So I guess currently not good, but if we put in place and implement fully the proposed measures, things will improve. That's the qualitative assessment.
Okay, so it says it's on track to an improving trend in 30 years' time. But below all of this, it says we do not have evidence of widespread improvement occurring at this time. So I presume that's over the last 3 years. So the trend is at very best flat to negative. That Sapara follows on the next page, page 42. So anyway, look forward to the next SOE report. I think you've got the gist of that one. The next one's on page 42, the following page. By 2025, stock is excluded from all year-round flowing streams, etc. So can I ask the question that all those streams that Hawke's Bay Regional Council and perhaps our fellow territorial authorities are in charge of, are we party, do we graze stock on any of those streams or waterways whatsoever? And if we do, well, let's just get the answer to the first bit.
So Chris isn't with us today. He's on he's doing civil defence matters, but it's my advice from our river management team that all of the grazed areas on HBRC land are fenced. We do have issues from time to time of those fences being cut and sometimes washed out in storms, but there is a policy position that on all of our river berms, the waterways are fenced. And where the fences do come down, it's a priority to reinstate them. So that is the policy position. Obviously, we've got waterways that are mowed rather than grazed, and so they won't be fenced. But that's certainly the status of those that are grazed.
So if we were to provide a FMP on ourselves, insofar as keeping stock excluded from waterways and streams, would what we are doing now pass the muster, do you think?
Yes, it would, certainly to the best of my knowledge. And yes.
Okay. Okay.
But
all right.
We can provide you with an update on that if that's useful, to give you some comfort of the extensiveness of that.
Thank you. I've seen quite a few streams on the Kotamu in and around, which just have actually a non-live hot wire protecting the streams, which we received rent for. Just finally one, 45, page 45, in and around. But this was, remember, first written, I think in 2018 was the first version of this. Is that right? By 2030, Hawke's Bay has environmentally sustainable, harvestable, and identified and storage ore plans, basically for water storage. So that was by 2030, so 9 years away. This was first written 3.5 years ago or so. How is that progressing insofar as most of these things take quite a long lead time to get built and commissioned? So are we on track? Because that's the measure we've given ourselves.
Yes. So look, I think we are. Obviously, the caveat in there was either that they would either be stored or plans to be stored would be in play. When we designed this performance measure, it was in relation to the council's water security program, which was part of our long-term plan that's just finished. And the intention was to run a comprehensive program across the region to understand our water resources, opportunities for our water harvest and storage, which Tom Skirman's program has been doing, and then to advance those that are feasible to a state of consenting and what have you. So, and that includes underground storage, obviously, with respect to managed aquifer recharge. So look, I'm confident that that program is on track to certainly meet a 2030 deadline of us having identified and either stored or plans to store.
Okay, I've got this.
James.
Thank you, Chair.
Sure. Just there's a few hands up. Now we'll just go Peter, Giraffe, and Api. If you don't mind, Giraffe and Api. Just Peter, can you just ask your question, please? Anyway, as well.
And mine's just in regards to governance and partnerships on page 48 in the levels of service agreement. And I just acknowledge the partnership with the regional council in regards to some of the initiatives that have been undertaken. And I suppose it's from mana whenua, it's recognising that the change and enhancements that's been done. Obviously, we've gone through a period where we reviewed the Māori Standing Committee Charter, and that's been great. So that's been implemented. If we look at the Mohaka plan change and that being a model or future model of engagement with Māori, I got positive comment from Tūwhare Tour in regards to the hui that were held up there. Obviously, Ngāti Pahuiri has commented as well about the conversations that have been taking place. So it's just acknowledging achieving some of those outcomes that went in the report. But yeah, you've got to acknowledge where improvements have been made. So that's been great. And also just the stance in regards to Māori wards and that, because that sent a clear message to Māori around the engagement with regional council. Obviously, Napier City Council didn't go there, but obviously there's a case going before the Waitangi Tribunal to look at that. So I'm just acknowledging in the report it didn't have some of those achievements in there, but for Māori that, yeah, we've recognised some important steps that the regional council's taken, and then obviously it's always got to look at measures and how those are being delivered. So yeah, I think that's just a pat on the back for the regional council in regards to what the board and what the committee have done in that partnership role. So just thought I'd acknowledge that, because obviously, as I say, people sometimes run a little bit of the attack and we don't acknowledge some of the good work that's been done. So just acknowledgement on behalf of Tai Whenua and iwi groups that have made comments to myself in regards to some of that positive stuff. So that's me, ngā mihi.
Right. Yeah, points well made, Peter. And yes, I think that deserves to be acknowledged in the report. But so thank you for that. Giraffe, you've got a comment. You've got a question.
Yeah, a comment. Thanks, Peter. That's really much appreciated. We don't often get to hear that when it happens. It's often the other way around. Just want to back up what James talked about regarding the 2030 site of water storage. And I had the privilege yesterday, just to report back to you, Craig, and the rest of the councillors. Yesterday, I had the privilege actually walking onto a site where they're actually currently doing drilling, sampling holes, just to see whether the infrastructure and the source structure is good enough for building a large dam. And they're actually quite a long way in, and it's a sort of design and a project that they're going through at the moment. And Thomas is really on fire with this team. He's got a very good team, and with what is proposed here and where we're on track, I feel we definitely will make that date. It's our staff are working very hard and fast on it, and I've got all confidence that we will make that 230, especially if you can walk on a site where actually there is some drilling happening and you can actually see the plans laid out over the land, and it's really exciting stuff. So well done to our staff, especially Tom.
Yes, thanks, Giraffe. Api, you're on mute. Still can't hear you.
Is that better?
Do
Can you hear
something
me now?
with your mic. Yeah, that's it.
Can't I? Two mute buttons here. Sorry. So firstly, just endorsing Committee Member Peter Eden's comments around some of those significant milestones and shifts in outcomes and relationships. So kia ora, Peter. With regards to the same page, page 48, where it talks about the annual reporting to Council on performance of strategic partnerships, could I ask that we initiate a conversation with the co-chairs of the Māori Standing Committee and the RPC around what a potential reporting framework might look like for that relationship between our various entities. I note that further down that a survey was looking to be conducted. And so while we can gain some insight from surveys, I would like to see a more perhaps well, at least a framework that we can design together that might provide better indicators for us as governors in this space around how we're making any progress. But more particularly, the survey that's going out, has this been shared with the co-chairs of both those committees? And will they be providing input into that design or that survey design before it goes out to the members?
I just wonder whether back Desiree with comment at the council meeting for that. With that, perhaps consider that and make comment when reporting back on this paper.
Yes,
Thank
can
you.
do.
Yeah, Councillor Ormsby.
Kia ora, thanks, Chair. Just two areas of questions. Page 43, back to where Councillor Martin Williams was around the species and habitat table. So our EP sites, Ian, how many roughly or percentage-wise of those are wetlands?
Oh, good question, Councillor. Look, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. What I can tell you is that regionally we have about 3% of our original wetland habitat left. So I suspect that there's probably a low number of them that are actually wetlands, but in terms of the total, but those that are wetlands will be the highest priority sites because of their rarity.
And so do we focus on those wetland sites higher up the chain of our EP sites?
So at the moment, we basically work with those who want to work with us. So we promote the availability of funding. We proactively seek out those sites when our catchment advisors and our biodiversity staff are engaging with landowners. So we push and promote the opportunities for them to protect those habitats. But at this stage, we're basically working with those who are wanting to work with us rather than necessarily trying to find sites and convince people to work with us. Not to say that that latter approach won't become more of an opportunity for us, particularly with our catchment advisors, as we are now finding the ECS program, for example, reaching maturity and where people are well ahead of us. We're taking the opportunity with some capacity in that team to expand the conversations they're having with landowners to say, well, look, we know on your property we have these sites of significance. Are you interested in working with us to protect them?
Okay, thanks for that, Ian. I ask these questions because I go back to the realism of achieving what we've set out to by 2030. And how can we relook at that and address that based on how difficult we know it is to protect these sites?
Yeah, and look, the figures, they're aspirational targets that are in our strategic plan. And how do we get realism? Well, the only way that we can get these sites protected at a faster rate is to up our investment. It's a simple matter of having enough funding to do the work, and it's typically the most common thing we're doing on these sites is excluding stock, so fencing them, typically deer fencing them, and then working to remove plant and animal pests from them. That's all quite expensive stuff. So if we want to get around them faster, we're either going to have to invest more and we're also going to have to wait for things like the new National Policy Statement for Indigenous Biodiversity, which is due soon, to install some regulatory drivers so that landowners perhaps have more of a stimulus from a regulatory perspective, but we'll need to couple that with some assistance. Otherwise, it won't go fast enough.
Okay, thank you. And the second part.
Thanks, Ian.
Okay. Yep. Sorry, I've got one more lot of questions. Page 57, and I'll be really direct. Sorry, Chair. Page 57, you've got the table around riparian planting and erosion control scheme. Now, I was under the belief that that erosion control scheme was doing really well, has been doing really well, taken up well. So why in those tables are they reflected as not measured or not achieved? And basically you see red. So can you talk us through that, Ian?
Sorry, can you just, which page are you on again, sorry?
57.
56, 57.
Oh, 56 and 57.
56, 57. So the reason that they're showing is not achieved is the original performance target, so area covered was 3,000 hectares, and you'll see that we've got close to 1,300 in the last year and doubled it from the year before, but we haven't met the 3,000. And the same with the area of riparian fencing achieved. It hasn't met the performance target of 100 kilometres. But back to the point that James made earlier in the conversation, we set this program up from scratch. We took our best guess at what would be pragmatic targets to achieve, and what we found is actually we've set the bar too high for ourselves. The scheme is going really well. Uptake is significantly improving, but we set the targets too high. We should have had a much lower target and ramped it up over time rather than expecting we would go from 0 to 100 in the first year.
Great. Thanks, Ian. Now, there's a few hands up. I'm not sure whether, Sheriff, you've got further questions or just haven't shut your machine down, shut your hand down. That's good. Look, we've had a pretty comprehensive go at this. There's some comments perhaps can come back, Desiree, with the when we go to council. But if there aren't any further questions, can I have a mover to receive that report, the annual report, interim non-financial results? That you, Martin, did you?
Yeah, sorry, I did have one more question that I'd asked before.
Oh, sorry.
It's a reasonably significant one. I think it's just on climate change on page 77 of the agenda, in terms of our own efforts at being net zero. It says, there's a statement, the reduction plan highlighted that we should consider using a long road of offsetting to get to net zero quicker and to reduce our immediate impact in terms of vehicle use. Could someone please unpack that statement for me? And can I just, before that, whoever answers that does so, can I just note that in our resources on Stella, we don't have the 2031 long-term plan, the updated strategic plan, or the up-to-date regional transport plan. It would just be good to have those resources at our fingertips to guide decision-making and our thinking at governance level, please. Anyway, back to my carbon.
Can I just get you to hold there for a moment? Can I just get you to hold there for a moment, Martin? We've just slightly paid just a question, and can you just, we'll just move on with this current paper, and just can you move this? We received that report, and yes. I can second that. All those in favour will raise their hands. We're okay with that one. Now we'll move. Thank you. That's good. We'll move straight into that one, and your questions are relevant to that one, Martin. So can we have an answer to that, please?
So first of all, thanks for drawing to our attention those documents not being uploaded to Council of Resources. So we'll just make sure that that's done. In relation to the comment from the Climate Change Commission and their recommendation around reductions in emissions. So my understanding of what's meant by that statement is that not only do we need to think about the short-term offsetting through the use of forests as sinks against our emissions, we've also got to have a long-term plan to reduce the footprint that we've got. What I'd like to ensure is that in future organisational performance reports in this area, which is something that Councillor Voss has been asking for a while, that we include our NZU holdings from our forests. And so you can see the difference between the carbon that we're sequestering as an organisation and the emissions that we're creating. Anecdotally, I know that our emissions are far lower than we are sequestering. So we are sequestering around 13,000 tonnes per annum at the moment from our forests. But we also have to recognise that we've got liabilities around our harvest activities. So we've actually had our NZUs go backwards a little bit recently because of the harvest at together. So we have some liabilities. We're also cashing in obviously some of our NZUs to fund our climate change ambassador. So they're not available for offset. Having said that, the current carbon price at over $48 a tonne does mean we can probably sell a far fewer units to fund that program than we had previously thought. But in general terms, and we will provide you with the numbers on this, we are offsetting adequately at the moment, as long as we don't sell those NZUs or surrender those NZUs, the current footprint of council. Although what we also need to do is get you the regular reporting around diesel. In terms of the long-term reductions in the council's footprint, the thing that is going to be the biggest challenge for us is diesel with our heavy equipment, our diggers, mower tractors and what have you. And there is an ongoing exploration of biodiesel blends in that space, but it is going to be a challenge as long as electric vehicles don't exist to provide a solution there. So look, it's just work for council to continue to do. We're going to have to, I think, take quite a long-term view about our ability to get to zero, gross zero actually, let alone net zero. Does that, hopefully that answers the question.
Yes, thanks, James. And I do apologise for leaping ahead on the agenda. I only realised now that this wasn't. I've had them all linked in my mind as we're looking at very similar performance standards. Yeah, apologies for that. Thank you for that answer.
Yeah, no, perfectly understandable because their strong connection. So we are dealing with the last quarter of the last financial year, and the executive summary at page 75. When you look at it in total, it's an extraordinary amount of work. Desiree, I don't know if there's too much room for comment. All I'm wanting to say is that the major highlight for me was the adoption of the long-term plan. Extraordinary amount of effort gone into that, and I do have a question around it, Desiree, for you. And we'll go to page 77, where you've highlighted the significant events around the long-term plan. But my question is, what next for that plan from a strategic perspective? We've put an awful amount of energy in, and I pose this as a bit of a rhetorical question. Do we sit back and marvel at it, or what do you see strategically as the thing we ought to be doing? To keep, if you like, the helicopter view up above it, and for us as governors to keep that long-term vision in mind when we're making decisions.
Well, we've got a number of things sort of underway in terms of embedding the long-term plan, and one of those is to sort of agree some of the key strategic projects that are coming out of the long-term plan and put some rigor around those in terms of project management. So there is an opportunity to bring that back to council, where we've got a spotlight on strategic projects coming, where staff are going to be presenting to the exec on those. Well, first we've got to agree what those projects are, and then there's an expectation that staff will present a sort of a review of how they're going, and we're intending to do that twice a year. So we could think about bringing a similar sort of focus on those to the council table as well. And that would be one way where we can keep a strong alignment on what we're doing and how it links to the strategic goals set by the council. Don't know if James wants to comment.
I think you covered it well. Yep.
Great. Thanks, Desiree. That's useful. It's always good for us to be drawn back to the, if you like, as governors, to the strategic direction as opposed to what we love to do and dive into the weeds. So if you can think of ways in which you can keep us focused, I'd be interested to hear them.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions on the quarterly report? If not, I'm happy to move that. Receive that report. James, you've got something to say?
Chair, just before you put it to the vote. Look, I just wanted to acknowledge once again how unsatisfactory it's been having our financial reporting quarterly in a shape that doesn't enable you to have meaningful visibility of how things are tracking to the way that we've historically budgeted in a non-phased manner, and that our new financial management system will provide us with that information. So we certainly hope that from here, the quarterly reports will not only have the financials embedded in it for the quarter, but you'll get more meaningful information around tracking budget performance.
Great, thanks, James. In the absence of any other question or comment, I've moved, and if someone else, Jerry, if you could second that for me, that would be wonderful. Thank you. So all those in favour of receiving the report will raise their hand. Yep, that's all pretty good. Thank you for that. That's a pass through there. We've got. We'll quickly move on to agenda item 12, and which is the HBRIC quarterly update, and I want to raise Councillor Barker from his slumber and have him comment on that quarterly update.
With that gratuitous flick, I will respond. I think the report is pretty clear. It's been passed your eyes and you've approved it, Chair, so you should be familiar enough with it to be comment on it yourself. But it does show that the port has had despite people's predictions, the port has had a pretty good run, has returned a pretty good return. Better than was anticipated 12 months ago. The managed funds are progressing satisfactorily. Food East is on track and going well. Craig might wish to comment on that. Aquaculture, no further work at this stage, but I expect some more work to come on that. Whakatu Eardland Port has been pressed on pause. The government's offer to Napier Port was not sufficiently encouraging to get them to proceed. The good people of Whakatu have celebrated somewhat about that. It's a pretty standard steady progress report. I'm happy to move it.
Thank you. Great, thank you. Craig, have you got a quick comment, please?
Food East. Yeah. So thank you. The earthworks consent has been lodged and approved. The building consent and contract/tender with a party that's been involved from the start is underway right now. You may or may not have received an invite. September 16th, 9 a.m. at the Elwood Road site. You're most welcome to attend a quick ceremony there for turning of the sod, and you're especially welcome a year later for the grand opening. We have hired a project manager, actually, Mr. Peter Simpson, which you'll meet at some stage. Top man returned from overseas back to home, Hawke's Bay, to run the show.
A grand opening, is this going to be going to get lots of OIAs about the excessive cost that you embarked on, splashed all around the place, or we're just going to have an opening?
I'll put them under the chair's gambit, actually. The Dom Perignon versus Verve Cleek was the big debate, but I'll let you sort that one out, Rick.
Beer.
Right.
Peter, you've got a question.
Yeah, it's just on page 93, and I sent the Māori budget was underspent by 11%, and they said very digital, and that can, just in regards to that budget and that, can that be reallocated for spend in environmental areas within the Māori community? I'm just asking a question, because obviously if you're underspent, then obviously there's room to move some budget around.
So that's that previous paper, Peter. Is that what you're referring to? In
that was in, attachment item 11, attachment 1.
Sure, 93. Yeah, okay.
And it's just that governance and partnership, tangata whenua partnerships and community.
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, if just returning to that, sorry to dive back into a previous paper, but if Desiree could just incorporate that in her response on that Māori governance commentary that I think we agreed to include in the next paper, in that paper. So that's there. Have I got that right? So just returning back to the HBRIC paper, any further questions there? That's item 12. RP, you've got a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is with regards to 14, the Whakatū Inland Port. Could staff forward some details around those changes? I'm particularly interested in the 5-year delay that was advertised through media releases and the impacts that'll have once the Wharf 6 opens. So I don't need a particular answer here. I'm just sending a signal out that I'd like some reference to where I can get a better understanding of what that implies.
James, just a quick.
Well, could I just respond briefly to Api? This is a report from HBRIC. This is not particularly a council matter. And it's HBRIC was not particularly central to this. It was trying to help facilitate it. The matter is between Napier Port and its own shareholders, well, Napier Port board. So this council is kind of 2 or 3 steps removed from this. So I'm just struggling a little bit to see how council staff could, with authority, report to you on that, other than give you possibly, I could give you as a verbal briefing on it. Happy to talk to you about it.
Yeah, fair point, Councillor. That's you're comfortable with that? Up, have a chat to Rick at some point and just cover that off.
And very much appreciate the offer. Thank you very much.
Sure. Councillor Barker has moved that we receive the HBRIC report, seconded by Councillor Foss. All those in favour of receiving the report will say aye, or will raise their hand. That is carried. We'll quickly move to agenda item 13, which are those minor items, and I think we agreed to 2 of them. The update, well, I can't recall the first one. We had the public transport, Martin, and then an update on business. I can't read my writing here.
Hinaway asked about an update on business continuity for the regional council, and that's kind of in the field of what James has reported. So why don't you let James just take his matter?
Sure.
Thank you, Chair. So look, first of all, in relation to the civil defence situation. So just to be clear, a national civil defence emergency has not been declared. So the civil defence powers have not been invoked. That means at the present point in time that health are leading the response to the level 4 lockdown, and the civil defence group is effectively providing support around coordination between other agencies. There was a meeting this morning of the welfare coordination group, and the last information I had was there was going to be an 0800 number publicised and operative from midday today that would enable needs assessments to be undertaken by the civil defence team of those in the community requiring welfare assistance, and largely that welfare assistance would be provided by other agencies. Since last year's lockdown, the ability of the Ministry for Social Development to provide welfare response has been enhanced. Similarly, around the Ministry of Business Innovation and Employment to provide housing assistance. So the system is better geared up, as is the DHB than it was this time last year. So all of that results in a smaller role for civil defence at this point in time. I understand from police they're taking an education approach for the next 24 hours, and then we'll move to a stronger enforcement position around the level 4 lockdown rules, movement controls, that sort of thing. We have deployed 5 staff as of this morning from the Regional Council into the Civil Defence team, just to provide them with a bit of support because they're running a 12-hour shift at present. So on the civil defence side of things, it's a bit of a watching brief. There are indications that we should be prepared for longer than 3 days, which is probably quite self-evident to everybody. Obviously with 5 cases now clocked up in Auckland, and that number expected to rise, and possibly some cases outside of Auckland and Coromandel yet to be discovered. So we're starting to work on the assumption that we're looking at probably 7 days at least, but until that decision is made by government, we're in a 3-day holding pattern at the moment. With respect to the regional council's functions, so our essential services are our pollution response, and so the pollution response team will respond to any significant pollution events. Minor issues such as odour, we still want to receive complaints from the community and we'll log those, but we won't be putting people into the field unless it's absolutely necessary. We're going to maintain a surveillance program around our assets, particularly our pump stations and the like, just making sure that we've got staff keeping an eye on those. But Works Group is effectively stood down and not undertaking any of the normal maintenance work that would be at this time. But they are all on standby and set up in rotational shifts should we have to move into responding to a natural disaster event. Just across the rest of the business, so the bus services, we have discussed with Go Bay taking the service back to the Saturday program that we ran during the last lockdown, which enables those in the community that need to get to a supermarket or to a doctor and rely on buses to have an option, but obviously at a reduced level of service since we haven't got commuters, etc. And we obviously want to minimise the amount of interaction that we're facilitating within the community at the moment. And that's been discussed with Waka Kotahi overnight, and they're in agreement with the approach that we're currently taking. So information's gone up, I believe, on our website, or at least is programmed to do so, to explain what's the status of our operations, including the bus information, and we'll continue to update the community as per any changes. Certainly all of our offices are closed. We are in a better position than we were last lockdown with respect to incoming phone calls. So our new Microsoft Teams platform is well and truly embedded now, and so our staff who take phone calls from the public on our main line, particularly around rates inquiries and what have you, are all operating today, and so we can deal with a reasonable call volume of those in the community. Perhaps the last thing to say is our rates invoices were going out this week, and we've had indications from New Zealand Post of just 1 day's delay as they've had to change some of their logistics, but the rates invoices will continue to be posted out, and the last ones are due to go on Monday next week. So happy to take any questions, but that's the general state of things. Staff are well practiced at working from home. We have got everybody essentially digitally enabled and deployed in the working environments seamlessly at this point.
Councillor Ormsby, you got a question?
Yeah, thanks for that update, James. I just want to ask about the open spaces, whether there's going to be any changes there, like signs, etc., that we had last lockdown.
Yeah, so look, at this point, we've decided not to take any action and rely on the government's direction around the use of recreation. So you are able to leave the home for recreation. So we'll await instruction from central government, but it is one of the things that local authorities are seeking guidance on from central government. And if we get a direction to close them, we'll put up signage. Again, because we're sort of looking at a 3-day duration at this stage, we didn't think there was a necessary step to take, but obviously if we're into a longer lockdown, we'll be reviewing that.
Can I just respond on that to say that my experience of wandering around the walkways and pathways that HBRC has, the signs from last lockdown are still there, telling people to be socially distanced, keep this, don't touch things. I was looking at it the other day thinking, gee, are these things still in date or out of date? But they're obviously still there. So most of the signs, I think, are still there. Helpfully, but I'm not sure because we've had the prior planning thoughts.
Councillor Foss, and then Martin will come to you because you've got more transport issues, I think.
Thanks, James. Just if we go longer than 3 days, 7 days, or even 14 days, what implications could or would that or could it have on the by-election in Hastings for the vacant seat? I understand it's postal voting from the 19th to 24th. Things are supposed to arrive, so that's all good. But I'm just not sure if there are any implications at all.
So we were asked for some comment on that from Hawke's Bay today this morning, and we have indicated that we will review the election date possibly if indeed we are in extended lockdown that creates some issues. We've got some statutory deadlines around that which create some issues, and we obviously need to work within the law. I think we've got a little bit of flexibility. I don't know whether Leanne's still on the call. I think we've got a little bit of flexibility at the back end, but not a lot. So we would only do that if absolutely necessary. So what we have done today is just publicise the key dates, reminded people that the election's about to begin and that as of tomorrow, voting begins and voting papers are going out. So I've had no indication that there's been any disruption to the supply of voting papers, and I think New Zealand Post at this stage is trying to keep the mail flowing.
Thank you.
Thank you, James. Martin.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And look, James, thank you to you and to the executive team for the hard work obviously done, particularly last night and last evening. No doubt a busy time for you on the pivot to get us into a place where our essential services are continuing to be provided in the civil defence context. My question was really just quite a specific one. Could our website, when it has the revised information about the bus services uploaded to it doesn't yet by the look of it, just make it just remind the public that the wearing of masks on the buses is mandatory. That's the advice I've got from the COVID website. But equally, the drivers are not the police on that. They don't enforce that, but it is a legal obligation from the government to wear that mask. If that could just be brought to everyone's attention alongside the revisions to the timetable. Thank you.
I'm just popping up there. Can I just, sorry, I just sort of jump in. I've just been editing while you're talking our revised statement for our website on the bus services. We are reminding all passengers that they require a face covering. HBRC have provided a couple of hundred face masks to Go Bus this morning so that they are available on those bus routes. In addition, we are removing cash handling so that passengers can enter rear of buses and not approach the bus driver. That's probably the most contentious at this point, so we'll just see how that goes. Hopefully most people will have a B card, but we'll just see how many complaints we get.
Thank you, Katrina. Are there no other issues around that matter? So if not, I'd like to now have someone move us into public excluded. We've got one item to consider there. So can I have a mover to move into public excluded? Martin, thank you. And Craig, thank you for that. Oh, Rick, you've got your hand up. That's fine. They've got. We've moved that. All those in favour of going and proceeding to public excluded will raise their hand. So there we are. We're in public excluded.